the history of the world is the history of the warfare of secret societies.
Good evening, listeners, brave navigators of the enigmatic and the concealed. Have you ever felt the pull of the unanswered, the allure of the mysteries that shroud our existence? For more than a decade, a unique comic publisher has dared to dive into these mysteries, unafraid of the secrets they might uncover. This audacious entity is Paranoid American. Welcome to the mystifying universe of the Paranoid American podcast.
Launched in the year 2012, Paranoid American has been on a mission to decipher the encrypted secrets of our world. From the unnerving enigma of MK Ultra mind control to the clandestine assemblies of secret societies. From the awe-inspiring frontiers of forbidden technology to the arcane patterns of occult symbols in our very own pop culture. They have committed to unveiling the concealed realities that lie just beneath the surface. Join us as we navigate these intricate landscapes, decoding the hidden scripts of our society and challenging the accepted perceptions of reality.
Folks, I've got a big problem on my hands. There's a company called Paranoid American making all these funny memes and comics. Now, I'm a fair guy. I believe in free speech as long as it doesn't cross the line. And if these AI-generated memes dare to make fun of me, they're crossing the line.
This is your expedition into the realm of the extraordinary, the secret, the shrouded. Come with us as we sift through the world's grand mysteries, question the standardized narratives, and brave the cryptic labyrinth of the concealed truth. So strap yourselves in, broaden your horizons, and steel yourselves for a voyage into the enigmatic heart of the Paranoid American podcast, where each story, every image, every revelation brings us one step closer to the elusive truth.
The CIA probably isn't reading your minds yet, but they are almost certainly trying, which is a quote from Robert Anton Wilson, this 1975 article called The Politics of Psi that was published in the Berkeley Barb. And actually, I know of the Berkeley Barb because it was one of the first underground magazines that published underground comics. Zippy was one. There was another one called Lenny of Laredo, which was like these underground, very like highly political comics. Anyways, the only reason I even know about this article now is because I got Gabriel Kennedy here, aka Prop Anon. You've been on here before. We've talked about Chapel Perilous, the life and thought crimes of Robert Anton Wilson, which you can get on Amazon right now, and you should be checking out right now as we talk a little bit more. And you've also got a pretty awesome Substack at gabrielpatrickkennedy.substack.com. And one of the few newsletters that I haven't unsubscribed from. Like I actually love getting these updates from you, man. So welcome back to the show. We're going to talk more about Robert Anton Wilson.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you for having me on again, and for those kind introductory words. And
we were just talking too that there's a few names that I'll bring up towards the end of this, and you were like, I don't really know where I land on them. And man, I got to tell you, I don't know where I land on Robert Anton Wilson, Timothy Leary, John C. Lilly, Uri Geller. I don't know where I land on any of these guys. So I don't. Are you settled on any specific names that I just mentioned? Like that's a good guy or that's a bad guy, or maybe it doesn't have to be that simplistic.
For sure, yeah, yeah. I mean, I like to try to integrate what kind of like. Not either or thinking towards this and like a sort of spectrum of the likelihood that so-and-so was in whatever intelligence agency. So you mentioned Uri Geller, who, really never really met Robert Anton Wilson from what I know. I mean, but there was, I guess and look, I'm not an investigator. I've not looked at any secret documents, nor have you, nor have like so many people.
Well, I might have. I had a top secret SCI clearance in the military.
So. Hey, pardon, my friend. Pardon, man. You very well. I can't.
I may have seen things that I'm not allowed to talk about. Who knows?
Okay. So you may be part of the conspiracy too, man.
Well, that's, I mean, what is it though? Is it that I worked for the military? Is it that I worked for Disney? Is it that I worked for Viacom? Like, which one of them is it?
There you go. Well, this is the theory of fungibility versus non-fungibility that Robert Anton Wilson talks about, and everything's under control. That fungibility means that one individual, one part is equal to the group. And it was originally used in the RICO cases where they could lock up like organized crime members. So some low-level mobster would also link in and get the mob boss, right? So if someone's in the CIA or was in the CIA, are they responsible for what, you know, Ted Shackley and his crew of, you know, the Team B agents in you know, Laos and Cambodia and Vietnam and the opium, you know, running and gun running that they were all doing, you know, is that low-level analyst the same? You know what I'm saying? Like a lot of people, especially these days, would be like, if you're part of the group, fuck you too. That's where we are right now, you know, in our culture overall. And that's the thing that's interesting about Wilson and other thinkers that are just trying to zero in with, you know, logic and critical thinking. It's like, how responsible are you as a member of said group? Like, us being white men, how responsible are we for the crimes committed by white men in the history of America or whatever?
100%.
So,
yeah, actually, once a year, me and my family go to one of those plantations where like black people whip you so that you feel like you're paying some kind of restitution to the ancestors.
well, you know,
Very expensive too.
Right. Well, I mean, shoot, if you could go, there's some places in Georgia that it's still called the plantation, you know, and Alabama still does have cotton fields. So it is interesting to see that shit, you know.
When you're posing that question too, like how much does the lowly accountant take in the breadth of all? I mean, that's a legitimate question. Like how much do you blame George Soros for being, you know, this 12-year-old nephew of his uncle that was working for the SS or whatever and going and collecting for the Germans? It depends. Like some people on this extreme spectrum are just like zero tolerance, right? Zero tolerance drug policy at school style. Like we found an Advil, we found heroin. It doesn't matter. Like both of them, you're getting kicked out. I mean, that is a non-zero number of people on the planet that do think like, I don't care where you're at in the spectrum. If you're over 0%, then you might as well be 100%.
Yeah, it's like the, you know, what Cory Doctorow calls the enshittification of the internet, where like the internet has become shittier and shittier over like the years. It's becoming enshittified, but it's the same deal with sort of like the enshittification of culture or the piece of shittification of culture, where anyone that you don't like for whatever smaller and smaller reason is a piece of shit, you know? So this has taken over our culture in the last number of years, and I wonder how many people are awake to it. But you know, here's a little interesting exercise: like throughout the course of the day, and all your doom scrolling that one might do, how many times do you hear that phrase, like such and such is a piece of shit? You know, like there hasn't been any sociological studies done yet, but I have a feeling that that term is used more today to describe other people than, I don't know, maybe in the past, but. That's totally off the top of my head with that, but I do think that it speaks to something though, and you know, bringing it back to, you know, that idea of, well, how responsible is one individual in a group of whatnot, you know, say the CIA or Mossad or, you know, British Secret Service or the IRA or Hamas or, you know, the IDF, you know what I mean? Like all these sort of groups, right? And, but where do I land? Yeah, man. Like, dude, I might, you know, moving speculations on stuff. So like Uri Geller, like, it sounds like he was a Mossad agent, you know, he might not have been, but like from the stuff that I looked at, like this documentary, Third Eye Spies, which got into the Stanford Research Institute stuff. It's a very good documentary. It's on YouTube for free. And that's, you know, one person who was, I mean, this is getting into what was the Stanford Research Institute and what was Uri Geller a part of? What did he get brought into with all that stuff? But I could leave that for, you know, further in the conversation. But yeah, he was like seen as like a very you know, controversial and exciting kind of like celebrity almost, you know, psychic who could bend spoons, you know, like in the Matrix and stuff like that. He was the first one, you know, like, and
it's not a big deal. I can do that with my hand. I've got a spoon right here. I can bend this thing, no problem.
Yeah, there you go, bro. Yeah, well, you know, people, it was the 70s, man.
Was it that big of a deal when someone's like, we've got all these freaking spoons we need to bend, and it's just taken so long to do it manually? If only there was a better way, right? And it turned into like a Ronco commercial.
And then Uri came along and this is like, look at these.
And it's funny though, because that became the thing you do. Like now the metric, oh, do you have telekinesis? Bend this spoon. Like, right? It's almost like it becomes one of the entry litmus tests to actually prove it's like this parlor trick.
Yeah. I mean, I think you ever try to put the spoon on your nose? That's impressive enough, I think, man. Like, yeah, but so that's sort of like, I don't know if it's in the realm of conspiratorial speculation or where it exists with that. I mean, there have been, and you'll see in that documentary, Third Eye Spies, like CIA agents or U.S. military agents being like, yeah, we were told that Uri Geller was part of the Mossad, right? And so the spy thing was like his cover because he was in the IDF, as was, so many people in Israel that they have to serve in the IDF or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, but so he had that background, in that world of the Stanford Research Institute, explorations of telekinesis and ESP and whatnot and remote viewing. Yeah, they were part of Project Stargate, the CIA classified and U.S. Army classified program into exploring what I just said, ESP, telekinesis, and psychic powers. Timothy Leary, what in the CIA? I mean, I don't know. I find it unlikely, but I'm trying to find like where did he got? But again, I haven't been over Leary's shoulder. Like, how do people get recruited into the CIA? How did they do it traditionally? Like there was that interesting, Robert De Niro movie starring Matt Damon back in the day now that was supposedly about James Jesus Angleton, and Matt Damon played the lead character. And it was kind of like how he got recruited into the CIA through the Ivy League and whatnot. So yeah, you had the Yale, Princeton, Harvard, people who tended to kind of, I guess, join CIA. I mean, Anderson Cooper, he was in the CIA before he became a huge famous.
Allegedly, Tucker Carlson. Yeah.
No, not allegedly. It's on his Wikipedia page. Like
okay.
he trained with them, and then he's like, "Oh, I'm good," right?
Well, and Tucker went to, I think, like a summer encampment or something, like a summer program with the CIA, and then decided not to join, or
right.
Allegedly.
Right, but no, I haven't looked into Tucker Carlson's stuff. I mean, but what was his dad maybe? But I don't know. I
feel like that's another one of the requirements. It's not just, are you going to make a good spook? It's that, do you bring along a nice little network of connections and people that can get out of jail free tickets or, industrial connections. Like there's more strategy than just, are you smart? Because they got plenty of smart people to pick from that they can compromise morals of.
100%. Yes. Like for say they're the people who go through the program, and then there's sort of agents that they like contract with who are not part of the CIA, but they
and those are like the witting versions. So you could wittingly work with the CIA. For example, I'll just throw a name out, but like Dr. Ewan Cameron, right? He might not necessarily be a CIA agent on the CIA payroll, but he does receive money that goes through CIA created establishments, and then those things pay him out. And that's kind of knowingly. That's almost like, where's this check coming from? Oh, you're telling me not to ask those kinds of questions. Okay, now I know where it's coming from. But then there's other versions where someone's just working on a project and a grant just keeps replenishing the pile, and you, unbeknownst to you, maybe the CIA and DARPA and DOD are the only ones replenishing that pile, and they're just so obfuscated. So you got like direct agents, and then you've got sort of these witting but unofficial agents, and then you've got unwitting agents, people that are working for the CIA don't even realize it.
Also known as useful idiots.
Perhaps, or maybe they just know enough to not know. Yeah.
Well, that's on the spectrum, right? Those that are okay with sort of an open secret and dance around it, but then those who are really truly clueless of all of that, because there's plenty of those people, man, and Yeah, I mean, well, then you're just kind of in that regard, you're like a tool of propaganda for an organization, which kind of ties into my whole notion of propaganda anonymous, where like people become mouthpieces for anonymous sources that you don't even know, and you're just spouting propaganda for that, you know? And then where is your agency involved in your own decision-making skills in your life about really who you are as a person right now, right here, right? Because I mean, that's what politics is, and propaganda and political propaganda is all about getting hearts and minds, which is basically people repeating the slogans that you need them to repeat to make such and so happen, you know? But back on that whole thing of, yeah, you know, I think about this a lot. I mean, but I've done a lot of research, but again, I mean, this was the first book of doing some really kind of really good journalistic intensive investigative research. So in that regard, I mean, I researched Robert Anton Wilson fairly thoroughly. Like I said in one of our earlier interviews, I FOIA requested the CIA, you know, and got the Glomar response, right? I read in one of your comments, which was interesting. Someone wrote to file another thing to what 201 clause or something like that. So I think I will plan on following up about Wilson more, but I was on top of them about that, because when you FOIA any of the, you know, say the CIA, they're more difficult too than say the FBI, because of the Freedom of Information Act seemed to really work better to get records from the FBI than other agencies. But yeah, their job as they see it is to give as little information as possible, if not no information, for whatever reason. They just feel like doing that, right? And then your job as the investigative journalist is to get as much information as you possibly can, and wording these FOIA requests in these specific ways that it's like a master's program to, you know, a master's class to figure out. And I'm still humbly, you know, learning how to do that. But that's a very empowering thing, to learn how to FOIA and to learn how to do library research and stuff. So,
would you consider Robert Anton Wilson an investigative reporter?
Somewhat in different areas. But
so what's with the hesitation? What makes Robert Anton Wilson unique in some regard that he wouldn't just be like, yeah, absolutely, he's an investigative reporter?
Right. So I think I consider someone like Seymour Hersh an investigative journalist. So the journalist part, the breaking stories. Seymour Hersh, late 1960s, for the New York Times, broke the story of the My Lai massacre, which was about the troop in Vietnam, the American Army troop that massacred a Vietnamese village. They just went crazy. There was no reason for it, led by Lieutenant
one
Kelly.
time. They only did that one time. Let's just be clear that this isn't like an ongoing thing.
I mean, okay, but it happened, and Seymour Hersh broke the story. You know what I mean? And it was completely denied by the army and the government, you know, at a really hot time in the country that was enough to cause people to push even more to get in the streets to end the Vietnam War. And it was a huge scandal, as you said, one time, you know, but that one time was highly scandalous. And Seymour Hersh was the journalist who broke the story. Do you know what I'm saying? So that's, to me, that's an investigative journalist.
Okay,
Wilson is an investigative
ground.
Yeah. And but Wilson does apply like an investigative research tone to like a historical study. Like he did that with Cosmic Trigger Volume 1. That was, it's dated now. That book came out in 1977, and he was an underground journalist sort of transitioning into this kind of freelance, what he became, like his own sort of unique voice in the counterculture of America and beyond. And so he was applying like an investigative approach to wondering, what's the Illuminati? Who were the Illuminati? And do they exist still? Because when he wrote Illuminatus trilogy with Bob Shea, the Illuminati was a trope, literary trope to play with and keep a story going and to make the readers feel paranoid. And but then he got caught up in it, as can happen, right? Especially imaginative writers like he was. And he started questioning and wondering. He saw proof that, like, okay, there perhaps were other groups before the Bavarian Illuminati that lasted from 1776 to 1783, founded by Adam Weishaupt, that perhaps they spoke about and carried this this secret wisdom, if you will. And Wilson went all the way to the root of exploration in the mid 70s there, of, linking it to, alien sort of higher intelligence emanating messages somewhere in the constellation of Sirius, right? And he completely explored that in Cosmic Trigger Volume 1. What makes him investigative is the fact that he is not settled on one explanation of this thing that has a lot of unknowns. You can't prove a lot of the things that he's talking about. You can't even scientifically test a lot of the things. This is just like stories that we've told to each other throughout the years, like that Sirius has this mystical power, right? Like, how do you really test that? Has this magical power? Yet it's something that has gone back to even the 16th century, where the writer Agrippa, like, even wrote about Sirius having these magical, energies or something like that. And even the ancient Egyptians, they thought it was a sacred, star, and they.
There's the Dogon tribe, and there's like lots of references to like ancient veneration of Sirius, and even understanding it as a binary star system, and all. Like, it's interesting how often it comes up. And one of the things that you're mentioning about Cosmic Trigger and the Illuminatus trilogy, that this series of articles that we read, the Science of Psi, or the Politics of Psi, that this was written before any of those books. And he's even mentioning in this article, oh yeah, I'm working on this thing called the Illuminatus trilogy, and here's kind of like some of the thinking behind it. And he brings up Adam Weishaupt, and he brings up Lord Rothschild, and even mentions that this kid, this 19-year-old kid that he gets wind of, is supposed to be the next. He's like the Michael Jordan of psionic abilities, right? That this kid can paint. He can. I'm going to paraphrase some of this. Correct me as I go, but that he can essentially summon the spirit of a dead artist. He can summon the spirit of Picasso, and then draw or paint a Picasso painting just by summoning like his essence. That he can do that with writing. He can summon, old writers and write some prose or some poetry in their hands. He can do the spoon thing. He can read your thoughts up to, I think it was like 5 miles away or something like this.
Right.
That he can even like put thoughts in your mind. And then the Robert Anton Wilson article, it sounds like from Robert Anton Wilson's own perspective, he's like, I met this kid. His name was Matthew Manning. He's like, I met him and we tried something. He went to one end of the hallway and I stayed at my end. And first he started drawing a star. And first he did a right side up star, which Robert Anton Wilson calls like the white magic star. And then he draws what he calls a black magic star with the 2 points up. And then he decides to draw the tetragrammaton or something, or a tetragram rather. And the kid across the hall comes back to him and he shows him all three of the things. He shows him an upside down star, a regular sided star, and this tetrahedron. He shows all of the exact same things. So they repeat the process. And this time Robert Anton Wilson draws like a Vesica Pisces or 2 interlocking circles and a dot. The kid does the same thing. So a large portion of the beginning of this Politics of Psi article starts on like, just trust me, bro. I was with this kid and he blew my mind, and just trust me as Robert Anton Wilson that this was legit, or at least as far as he had looked into it.
Right. I see where you're coming from then with the investigative sort of journalist approach, maybe. Yeah, I mean, he wrote those articles, The Politics of Psi. I think they're very interesting articles. He wrote them right before Illuminatus trilogy was published in late 1975. A series of 4 articles for the Berkeley Barb, the great Berkeley Barb. And Yeah, I mean, in terms of the presentation, Wilson was a true believer at that point, I would say. Like he was deep
Oh,
in
100. Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
he writes about this matter of factly that it's not even leaving any room for whether or not his mind is being made up. And a few times he'll be like, well, as we all know now, psychic abilities are as real as any other abilities. He kind of makes these
100%.
very forward statements in here.
Oh yeah, I mean, and he drew the ire of people from the Committee for Scientific Claims of the Paranormal. People like Michael Shermer and
James
others.
Randi, Randi
Yeah,
comes up
and Wilson attacked James Randi too. He attacked in his book The New Inquisition. He attacked the kind of approach from the psychop that this sort of academic, immediate skepticism towards anything ESP, PK, remote viewing related, because he thought that, they were also just not practicing good science either, because they were completely closed off to any possibility of, this sort of phenomenon. And dude, it was called the Psychic 70s, man. Do you know what I'm saying? Like this was like a cultural zeitgeist. I mean, Wilson was different than these people in the CIA and the U.S. military who were like, oh, the Russians are doing it, we got to do it. And that's how the whole thing started. People within the U.S. military caught wind. There was a book that was published. I don't remember the name of the book right now. I think it was called something like, it could be wrong, but Psychic Research or Experiments in the USSR, something like that. And it was about the supposed program that the USSR had been running for decades up until that point of psychic research. And the claims were fairly astounding, I suppose. How good was the science then being practiced? Who knows? Because this was during the Cold War. The Russians towards America was seen as the evil empire, and I'm sure it was likewise over there. So again, we're in the realm of post-World War II Cold War propaganda, where like any cat in a fight will put its back up first to seem larger than it really is. Was this book I've read or listened to people who believed what the USSR psychic research program was producing. The person who read that book and then brought it to a high-ranking military person believed it thoroughly too, as did the person who read the book. That movie, The Men Who Stare at Goats, that came out a while ago, gets into this a little bit. The origins of the Stargate program. They don't call it that at the time in the movie, though. It got declassified. I'm not quite sure when. But this woman Ann Jacobson writes about this in her book. I think it's Stargate, right? But that's the origin. So what I mean to say is it was already like this game of telephone. Like how much it's come out like in studies that the CIA, military intelligence grossly overestimated the capabilities of the USSR during a lot of the Cold War. The American military is by far the biggest in the world and has been that for decades. When you look at graphs about how many freaking bombs we have compared to other places, it's not even a question.
Well, we were comparing ourselves to we were comparing our actual stockpiles to their propaganda stockpiles. So Russia's like, we got all this, and we're like, uh-oh, we better double that. And then you find out that they had less than a tenth what they were claiming.
And so it was the same with this, with the origins of Project Stargate. And so you had these sort of true believers, if you will, these people that were convinced that psychic research happened. So Wilson, I understand the critical eye towards his perspective in 1975. I think Wilson in 1995 and 2005 would have perhaps a similar perspective as you, looking at someone who wrote that article and being like, hey, bro, you look where you're starting. You're already a believer in this shit. But this was Wilson, as he wasn't a doctor, he wasn't a scientist, he wasn't getting his stuff published in fucking anything vetted. He was getting this stuff published in underground newspapers. So he was, you know, a progenitor of the podcast culture that we live in. You know,
Oh yeah,
I heard this. You know what I mean? Yeah, you heard that. Let's scientifically break it down. Like, I mean, it's good to do though. It really is. And I think it's good to have that. I agree with you. His approach there is already sort of like, as a believer, like, and he's got his you know, premises already worked out. And he's already sort of like, come on, you know, check this out. And because again, at that time, yeah, he was experiencing, I mean, for instance, in June 1973, he spontaneously remote viewed his son Graham, you know, or so he writes in Cosmic Trigger Volume 1. You know, June 2nd, 1973, he's in, you know, Berkeley giving a lecture. And after the lecture, he goes to Tilden Park looking for his son Graham, who was, you know, staying in Berkeley. The Wilsons weren't living in Berkeley at the time. Graham was staying with some friends down there, and he just wanted to say what's up to him. Couldn't find him. This wasn't the time of, you know, cell phones. And he's hanging with his friends, and he sees a guy, street performer, doing some tricks or something. And Wilson is on, at this point, a trip of exploring the origins of the Illuminati, perhaps being found in the Sufis, like the you know, mystical Islamic tradition of this long Sufi, you know, whatever tradition, right? And he's convinced that this guy doing all this street magic is a Sufi, and he approaches him and asks him, like, "Hey, are you a Sufi?" And the guy, you know, his name is Parsifal, and he asks Bob, "Are you on the path?" Which that's a term within sort of, you know, Sufi tradition, like meaning, are you studying the taqwa and, you know, just the these wisdom traditions here. And Wilson's like, you know, they start speaking a little bit. For some reason, Bob tells him he can't find his son. And Parsifal says, "Hey, man, don't worry about it. You'll find your son." And as Wilson writes, you know, he had a vision then of his son Graham sitting at a Hard Castle's, you know, fast food joint on Telegraph Avenue, about 30-minute walk away from where he was. He walked over there with his friends, and he saw Graham sitting there at the counter, you know, about to eat. And then Bob asks, "Did you just get here?" And he's like, "Or have you been here?" Right? And Graham said, "No, I just got here." So, you know, Bob is like, "Oh shit, like I, you know, saw you through space, right? But also through time. I you know, saw you before you even arrived here, right?" So it's like a two-part sort of breakdown of this phenomenon that he writes about, right? And later on in the day, he goes to Shambhala bookstore, which is sort of like, it was a famous bookstore, and, you know, a lot of Buddhist texts, magical texts. He finds a book from Aleister Crowley, which kind of gives like these correspondences of like, you know, names and numbers, you know, and what it means. And Parsifal equated to the number 418, which equaled to the term, the great work accomplished, right? And Bob writes this in a letter to his sort of magical mentor at the time, this fellow named Israel Regardie, who's pretty much legendary occultist. You know, he just kind of registers it. But, you know, he was like, "Holy shit, like I remote viewed my son. Like that's crazy." 4 days later, you know, Bob does a, you know, sort of experiment, magic ritual, if you will. He drops some acid. He listens to John Lilly tapes and Aleister Crowley, you know, cassette tapes or something, the Bornless ritual, which is all part of this path that Wilson was on when he started doing magic. The Crowleyan magic was to attain knowledge and conversation with his holy guardian angel, which, according to Wilson, is Crowley's main mission in his whole magical practice. And everything else is like bullshit. Like, this is what Crowley was about. This is what Bob is saying, right? So Bob did that, right? And so 4 days after he kind of had this remote viewing experience, and he goes to the bookstore and he sees this synchronicity, because he was following synchronicities at the time. He believed that synchronicities were the code of how his holy guardian angel was communicating with him, And from 1970 to summer 1973, Wilson was following the Crowleyan curriculum, which was this notion of using creative visualization to envision and invoke deities, and to take these deities in and to sort of build yourself up, your magical muscle up, to eventually have knowledge and conversation with one's holy guardian angel. This is how Wilson breaks it down. So again, he does that 4 days after he has this wild experience. 6 weeks later, on July 22nd, he does the experiment again, but instead of doing acid, he does like tantra with his wife, Arlen. And the next day, he wakes up with this message from the dream world that says Sirius is very important. And July 23rd, 1973 has, kind of been set in stone as, the day that Robert Anton Wilson met his holy guardian angel, if you will. It's, it's maybe day now. It's Robert Anton Wilson Day in the city of Santa Cruz, July 23rd, right? Because it's also the day that Sirius is the highest point in the sky, or the brightest in the sky and whatnot. But you see, there was a succession of events. It didn't just happen, right? There was a number of things that happened leading up to it. Now, a synchronicity that he never wrote about or even really seemed to acknowledge or know about was that on that same day of June 2nd, 1973, another remote viewing experiment was going on further north. And this was like an official remote viewing experiment being done at Stanford Research Institute, where the psychic Pat Price was brought in to do another kind of scanning run of some coordinates that were done weeks earlier. And they wanted to double test what the original psychic, this man named Ingo Swann, saw, because what this person, Ingo Swann, reported was very different than what they believed were there.
Were these the features on the moon or Mars?
Well, so on June 2nd, 1973, not features on the moon or Mars. It was coordinates were given that the psychic, Pat Price psychic, remote viewed, zeroed in on, and he reinforced what Ingo Swann saw, which was basically Sugar Grove NSA kind of like facility, which was used during the Cold War to pick up signals from Russian satellites. So this was a highly classified, top secret black site that no one was supposed to know about. And somehow these two psychics in, Northern California scanned, and this, Sugar Grove was in Virginia or West Virginia. So they scanned thousands of miles away. The original coordinates that were given to some persons. How this played out was that SRI were doing these experiments funded by, as I said, the CIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, probably Navy, military. And their tests it was led by two guys, Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff, two scientists. And they were trying to, apply the scientific method and really test to see if people had, as I said, PK or ESP abilities. And they saw in their eyes conclusively that this was completely possible, that these people were doing this. And the Sugar Grove site viewing is sort of like the most legendary of a number of like far out experiences that supposedly happened with this crew at SRI in Menlo Park, Berkeley. And what they did was they gave coordinate points, longitude, latitude, to the person, the psychic, in this case, Pat Price, right? And he just did his thing, and he drew all this stuff and described going down kind of deep underground, 3 stories, zoning in, into a safe that was heavily locked, and moving in further into seeing manila folders with top secret printed on them, and the names of top secret operations, one of which was called Operation Pool Q, right? And within those folders had the names of operatives and people who should not be known, and Pat Price was writing all of this out. And so one of the CIA agents that was working with Targ and put off, this guy named Kit Green, who was the one who gave them the coordinates, reported this to the agency or whatever. And then a shitstorm rained down upon them, from all these different agencies. They're like, what are you doing? How did you find this? You're not allowed to be in here. You can't look at this stuff. What's wrong with you? So getting that sort of fire started or controversy started, it also kind of, proved their case that they were actually doing some serious psychic research at SRI, and they received funding for the next 20 something, I think it was 23 years. The program lasted around 23 years, the Stargate program. And it was eventually
called that espionage. That was the name that they gave that.
Espionage?
Espionage, like espionage.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Yeah, and then but within those 23 years and change, there was a series of other people that came in that what they call with psychic ability. This man named Matthew McConaughey. They were used to recover downed U.S. military. One thing was off the top of it was they had to find a nuclear sub or something like that, and they did, right. So they say, I'm not here to defend or deny whatever these results are. Also, whether or not this stuff exists, I have my own.
Well, let me ask you, where on the 19-year-old that Robert Anton Wilson's talking about originally, the guy that can paint and write and can tell you what you're thinking, what you're drawing, Matthew Manning, what's your read on him?
Yeah, difficult to say. The story with that, right, was that he displayed that he had these psychic powers, and then British Secret Services or the MI5 or 6, I forget which is domestic, they hit him up. This is what his kind of handler, this guy, Dr. Bander, was told Robert Anton Wilson in that article. Read on him, I can't even say, that's the one and only time Wilson ever wrote about that person, Matthew Manning. He never seems to follow up with this later. What's your read on this guy?
I'm not really sure. He kind of like you mentioned, he sort of disappears out of nowhere. I feel like if I met someone that legitimately was psychic, and I'm Robert Anton Wilson, and I have a personal experience with this guy, he's in my permanent soiree. He's coming with me to the clubs. He's at my birthday party. He's part of the permanent crew to I don't know, and I feel like it's weird for him to disappear. And the article, like you mentioned, it opens up with this Dr. Peter Bander, and alarm bells go off for me because I'm paranoid. I'm paranoid American, but it's this is Robert Anton Wilson talking about Dr. Peter Bander, and he describes him as an expert in criminology, ESP, and spook stuff. And the first thing I thought was why is it that ESP and remote viewing seem to always be directly tied to criminology and to some kind of military application, which I guess is kind of the entire premise of Robert Anton Wilson's Politics Society to begin with. And he talks about that the real truth about governments and occult science is even bigger than Watergate. So he's comparing that the military has been suppressing and secretly funding and just getting an entire monopoly on all psionic research, psionic warfare across the board. So I easily believe that part. But man, when it starts going into the different claims, I guess the capitalist in me is if that were true, then Disney would be selling it. If that were true, then there'd be a TV show on that I can tune into on Mondays about just this psychic guy doing psychic stuff. But maybe that's short-sighted a little bit.
Well, I mean, if you look at all the TV shows there have been about psychic guys doing psychic stuff.
I guess, yeah. None of them really
cultural interest.
None of them have really passed the muster for me in particular, but I might just be an an incredible hardhead when it comes to all this stuff. But
Oh.
are you familiar with the Stephen King book called The Institute, or the TV show that's based on The Institute?
No.
So it's a pretty old Stephen King book, and I think it just came out, like they just adapted it to TV. But the entire premise is that the military, or fill in the blank, some CIA, DOD wing of the government, that they pay attention to like school spelling bees and valedictorian classes, and they find these kids that are incredibly advanced in some sort of area, and then they further refine these lists into those that have telekinesis or psycho abilities. They call them
Hey, can I get
PKs
coffee,
and
Ben?
PKs. What's that?
Can you hear this? I'm muting the microphone. I'm asking the off-camera
I can hear you.
producer for coffee.
I can hear you fine.
This thing's supposed to mute, man. You're reading, bro. You're telekinesising this.
It doesn't work on psychokinetic communication, apparently.
Well, that sounds like the X-Men.
Now you're muted. Okay, there you go.
Yeah, right. No, that sounds like the X-Men. Like, yeah, man. I mean, like, so especially in this thing, it's sort of like they're and it lends itself, so the idea of psychic powers, right, because it's so unusual and extraordinary, lends itself towards literary tropes and utilization of, you know, people with these gifts in stories that we tell. I mean, this goes all the way back to, you know, this is what the myths were probably, right? Like people endowed with these, they were gods, they had these great powers. I mean, I write in my book, Chapel Perilous, The Life and Thought Crimes of Robert Anton Wilson, that the first living artist that Bob was really into was Orson Welles. And Orson Welles was a great trickster, but he was also the voice of this person who was in the show The Shadow, which was a radio show, you know, and it always started, who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of man? The Shadow knows. And that person was gifted with psychic abilities and you know, knowledge and magic and whatnot. And so where Wilson was going in the 70s, and maybe still sort of continued with through the 80s, was that through his investigations of not only a psychic phenomenon there, but like him speaking with this new branch of physicists and particle physicists that were coming out of Berkeley at that time, a book that was written by this person, David Kaiser, called How the Hippies Saved Physics, talks about Wilson's, physics friends at that time. So he wasn't hanging out with Matthew Manning. Also, Matthew Manning was also in England, you know, and Wilson was in Berkeley. But, you know, so he was hanging with this group called the Physics Consciousness Research Group. You know, people, you know, Saul Paul Sarag, Jack Sarfati, Fred Allen Wolf, and then another guy, Nick Herbert, who was not in the Physics Consciousness Research Group. But these physicists, especially Jack Sarfati, were forwarding these ideas, backed by science, the discoveries in quantum physics, you know, quantum entanglement, especially at that time. And they were ahead of the curve. You know, this group, part of that group was this physicist named John Clauser, you know, who did the first sort of lab experiments testing Bell's theorem to see, you know, how quantum entanglement sort of works. You know, Clauser ended up winning the Nobel Prize, you know, 53 years, many years later. He won it in 2023, you know, for his experiments that he was doing in the early 70s, experiments that Wilson reported on in Cosmic Trigger Volume 1. And this is what makes Wilson, that book, more than anything, important, because as Saul Paul Sarag says, and this is where he is like a very good journalist, because he has the scoop. Wilson is the first writer to get it right, to popularize the early experiments in quantum entanglement and put it in his book in the form of a chart in Cosmic Trigger Volume 1. It was given to him by Saul Paul Sarag. But that chart shows what Clauser and these two other physicists ended up getting the Nobel Prize for many years later. That's extremely significant. That's why that book, one reason why that book is a classic. Another thing, though, when reading him say, and that, well, okay, so not going too far on that book, you know, do people have these psychic abilities and whatnot. I mean, he was definitely really seriously questioning that stuff at that time. Years later, you know, he talks about how he kind of moves through all this, because at one point he thinks he's receiving telepathic messages from, you know, his holy guardian angel and from an, you know, the dog star Sirius constellation.
Extraterrestrial by definition.
Yeah. And later on, he's just like, all right, that was just my right brain communicating with my left brain, right? So he interiorizes the process more, because what he's describing ultimately is this process of psychic change that happens to people when they practice certain like wisdom or magical traditions. You know, Aleister Crowley in his book 4, you know, right at the beginning, he states what he's looking to do, and that is immediate and accelerated brain change. You know, how Saul of Tarsus became St. Paul, you know, someone who was there, you know, robbing and stealing and beheading people, who was blinded by a light and thrown off a horse and then came up and wanted to help people. How Jesus and the Buddha, you know, drastically seemingly changed, like accelerated willed evolution of your human form. This is where Wilson was going with that book, right? That's what he explored in Thelema with that. Now, tying this into a wider frame, I mean, I wanted to say, like, what I found interesting about the Politics of Psi articles, especially that first one, Matthew Manning, Wilson writes in that, he says that I have it on excellent authority that for some years now, the U.S. government is heavily involved in research using psychics and sensitives for warlike purposes. So again, this was a classified program. Like, Bob didn't know, Wilson didn't know that there was a CIA program happening per se at SRI, but he did know when he was told by a friend of his, Isaac Bonwitz, who visited SRI, right? And then came back and told him, hey, they're doing this stuff here. Other journalists, though, sort of stay on the case. Bob never really follows up. He never really, he doesn't explore SRI. So that's now one, if, you know, maybe other people who are straight investigative journalists would have just stayed on that, because he's writing novels and stuff too. You know what I mean? Like this journalist named Jack Anderson, who is, you know, kind of a journalist, a professional, published in, you know, big newspapers and stuff. He follows SRI through the years, and he's kind of reporting on the research there. So it was kind of an open secret, I'd say, not just in Berkeley, but like sort of everywhere in a way, like that it even kind of came out in Ghostbusters, right? Like, I don't know if those guys were getting government funds, but it's one of those things that it's just strange how the culture converses about these things, you know?
Well, I feel like there might have been a dynamic of, like, I know what's, like, everyone knows what's going on, but if you connect the two things and say it out loud or publish it out loud, then you're not allowed in anymore. And it's like, if you just don't talk about it publicly, then you can witness all this really cool stuff and kind of dance around it and make references to the other people that are there and the cool stuff they're doing, but to not actually go all the way balls deep on SRI. Otherwise they revoke your sort of, I guess, like membership. I don't know. It's the only way that I can rationalize why you would run into a group that seems to be doing the laser focused version of exactly what you're interested in, and then be like, I'll move on to something else now.
Yeah, well, again, I mean, look what happened though, right? Like Illuminatus trilogy was published like immediately after those articles, right? So he's now getting interview requests for Illuminatus trilogy. You know, he's being recognized as a novelist, which is a pretty big deal, you know. I don't know. I can't go inside this guy's mind. That's one thing none of us, I don't have those psychic abilities.
We got to get Matthew Manning in here. I looked him up. He's still alive.
He's still alive. But, you know, that'd be next level, man. I mean, I guess Houdini did this in a way to read the mind of a dead man. I mean, you could converse with a dead man.
He claimed to have summoned, I guess summon's the word that I'm using, but he claimed to have actually gotten deceased people to then like talk and be like, oh, I believe in the afterlife now because I'm in the afterlife.
Right. But this is next level, though. If you get those deceased people, if you could read their minds.
Right. Like it's not just them talking, but you can actually read what they're thinking as they're dead.
That's right. That's the next level. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it's, let's see. Of course, well, I'm curious, man, because, yeah. Why do you think, how do you, where's Bob in the CIA in your worldview?
Honestly, you're such an expert on Raw that like I don't even my guesses would be ill-informed and just straight guesses, but it almost feels like he is so close to so many people that, let's not say had direct ties to the CIA, but clearly on paper were funded by the CIA, at least through one extra little connection, right? Like someone pays SRI, and then SRI has the money to then give Bob and his friends all sorts of funds to do what they want with. I almost feel like everyone was just, don't talk about the cash cow. Like we all know where the money is essentially flowing from, maybe allegedly, but just don't talk about that guy in particular. And I almost, my optimistic view of Bob is that he knew this and was like, well, what can I talk about that will let you know that I've got some extra insider knowledge? For example, talking about the very Illuminati at all is one of the tells. But even in this article, he mentions how this Matthew Manning guy, and this is kind of like I got some insider knowledge. He doesn't provide specific sources or references, but he says that Matthew gave a private demonstration to Lord Rothschild, which was Victor Rothschild at this time in the 70s, associated with the CPRS. It was the Central Policy Review, which was essentially like the main think tank of the British, and that he gets invited there, but then he turns it down because he realizes that they're all like Ministry of Defense. And then later on gets courted by, I don't know if it was SRI. It was like, it was London University. He gets courted by London University. And then he finds out that London University is also getting funds from Ministry of Defense. And he's like, okay, no thank you to that too. And almost reminded me of Good Will Hunting, where like you got this brilliant guy and it's like, oh, wait, the DOD is funding this? I don't want any part of this. And he kept saying, no, no, no. And I feel that if that was your approach, is like, if the DOD or DARPA have anything to do with this, I'm going to say no, then you would just be saying no to every opportunity that comes up. Because again, the whole premise of Bob's article here is that the military owns a monopoly on this entire field. So, but by that logic alone, if he's writing that the military has a monopoly on psychic research, then yeah, of course, anyone that he deals with in the psychic realm, or organizations or universities that are dealing with psychic research, it's kind of like him letting you know, I know that I'm working for the government, or at least I'm working within this space dominated by the government.
Right on. Well, yeah. So first, the claim, because he put it out there, that Wilson received money from SRI. He did not. Yeah, there was no funds going to Bob from Stanford Research Institute. Any funds going to SRI was used in.
Right, I didn't mean Bob in particular, but like,
no, I know. But as the guy who wrote the biography, dude, I have to make sure every I is dotted and T is crossed. Like anything that's put out there that is not true about someone is a claim that needs to be addressed. I mean, I know it's flippant, but because you know what's weird is that over the years, man, and it never made sense to me though. And I tried to figure it out, and dude, maybe it is though too. But when I would inquire on it, like I met this, meeting people over the years. Oh yeah, Robert Anton Wilson. Oh, I heard he was in the CIA. Well, what was it? Oh, I don't know, man. I don't know. I just heard he was in the CIA. It's like, bro, that's not fucking scientific. It's like, hey, I heard.
I think to be more specific and meticulous with words, it's that his proximity, and he even mentions him by name in a lot of his works, of John C. Lilly in particular and Timothy Leary in particular, and that to follow the money for where some of their research funding ultimately came from. Of course, it comes from government groups like that, and it's not like Timothy Leary or John C. Lilly walk up to Langley and they knock on the door and they're like, "Give me my next check, please." But that the flow of money, like the trickle down aspect, and I guess that as I'm reading about Robert Anton Wilson talking about the Rothschilds and the CFR and Cecil Rhodes in 1888 and Adam Weishaupt, I get this feel from all his writings that there's this ominous group that like from thus flows all money. Like any money that gets into the market in any capacity is ultimately because this Illuminati was like, we need money to go to this area, and everything else is sort of ancillary to that. And that's kind of the feeling that I get from Robert Anton Wilson, that it is this big holistic ball with maybe a group that's, I don't know if orchestrating is the right word, but commandeering maybe, or attempting to commandeer.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that sort of approach is what he was parodying in Illuminati's trilogy, that there is any one specific group that's pulling all the levers and strings on everything channeled down, but in the 70s, let's get specific, like in the mid 70s, I mean, that's what Cosmic Trigger Volume 1 is also about, like another story of Wilson's life is, born and raised in Brooklyn, got married at 28, lived in, shithole apartments. His wife had some money, right? Lived in some shithole apartments after they got married. They moved out to Ohio. He started his career as like an editor and a writer. Like he got his resume going, and then he got hired at Playboy after writing for Paul Krasner's sort of cutting edge, like pioneering magazine, The Realist. And then he wrote for another sort of really pioneering magazine called Fact magazine. Right. So he was grinding, man. He was grinding as a writer. Do you know what I'm saying? Like opportunity, he got some opportunities, but like the opportunity was to be an associate editor at some kooky like magazine in Ohio. It's not like he's going to Madison Avenue. You know what I'm saying? Like,
right. He's writing for the Barb.
he grinded. By the time he got to the Barb, he'd already had hundreds of articles published. Like, that's what I really tried to show in my book of like how long this guy worked, before he got any sort of shine, like this doesn't happen overnight. His first novel came out when he was in his early 40s, and even then, back then, that was a bigger deal. You were older in your 40s and in the 70s. You know what I'm saying? Today it's different. But like he was a Playboy associate for 5-6 years, got paid very well from 66 to 71. That's when he and Bob Shea wrote Illuminati's trilogy. They received a lot of far out letters to the letter section, and they crafted a wild paranoid tale that was an amazing read. But from 71 to, 77, Bob descends from getting paid to destitution. Like he's on welfare and in Section 8 housing with a family of 4 kids, a dog and a cat, and a dying mother at one point. This guy's just trying to keep it together, writing these articles that get published in these underground newspapers. He does have this amazing ability, though, to get very close to inner circles, if you will, or people high up. Some people just have that ability, maybe because they recognized, as the 5%ers say, A alike, B alike, real recognize real. Like he met Alan Watts somehow in the late 50s, became a mentor to him. He met Joseph Campbell and held his own in a conversation about James Joyce and Taoism when he's in his 20s. Like Bob knew his shit. Like from his first published article in 1959, he's already stating philosophically what he's about. And it was called The Semantics of God. And that's basically like the words that we use really don't describe truly what's really going on. Like we live in a flux, like a process reality, and we have to get better at the way that we describe things. Like this is his contributions as a critical thinker, and that's something I really zeroed in on in the book too, because those who've read Bob get a lot of value out of the way that he breaks down his style of thinking about things, right? Which is to fall away from either or thinking and to apprehend phenomenon on its own terms, but to utilize scientific method to get some concrete, like as concrete as you can, percentages, because that's how science works, you know? And so I apply that, man, I applied that to his life to see like that was something like when Leary got out of jail in 76, he had some bad heat on him, some dirt on his name, because when he went missing in jail for 18 months, Wilson called it the Great Silence. He was taken into the feds wouldn't let him communicate to any one of his friends. During those 18 months, speculation started about Leary, and they were also aggregated. You know, they were promoted. He was bad jacketed. Bad jacketing is a technique. It's written about in FBI memos. It's a technique from the FBI to make your target look like a fucking idiot, right? And someone you don't want to like associate with. Leary, you look at the history of Leary. I studied him a lot for this thing. Like New York Times articles about Leary always shit on him. This guy got shit on left and right for this research that he did. I don't know exactly, you know, with experiments that he did, he wasn't funded by any government agencies because he was kicked out of Harvard in the early 60s. And so he went rogue, you know, so he depended on, he lived in a mansion in Millbrook that he ran his little institute for a little while before it got busted. There were these rich kids that like they were the heirs of the fortunes, right? And it was actually one of those richies that kind of flipped on a lot of people, because when the feds finally arrested Leary after he broke out of jail, so Leary was arrested in 69, was called the most dangerous man in America for having like a joint, was sentenced to 37 years in prison. He escaped with the help of his wife at the time, Rosemary Leary, and the Weather Underground and the Black Panthers. He escaped prison. They went out to Africa, either Algiers or Algeria. I think it might have been Algiers, where Eldridge Cleaver was living, right, with his wife. And Leary describes as kind of being like kidnapped by Eldridge Cleaver. And then they kind of escaped, and they were hopping all over Europe being fugitives. And then he broke up with Rosemary and then met all these other people. He got arrested again. Wilson said it was by the CIA. Leary got arrested by the CIA in Afghanistan, put in jail in 1973, and then remained there for another 3 years. During those 3 years, Leary went silent for 18 months, and Bob and all these people were trying to get in contact with him. And that's when Leary got this tag of being, Charlie Thrush, they called it, like just being a snitch, right? So he got snitch jacketed, right? And so Leary had a beef with one of his lawyers, this badass lawyer named Michael Kennedy. Michael Kennedy is a fucking activist, badass lawyer, man. He had a really illustrious career of like doing all these big defenses. According to Leary, Michael Kennedy was like the overground mouthpiece for the Weather Underground. Like, that's inconclusive. I don't know, right? But also, according to Leary, Michael Kennedy and his assistant or whatever, they basically stole the house out from under Leary that Leary owned, that he was going to leave to his children or give to his kids. So Leary was pissed at Michael Kennedy. So this beef happened. The editor at Berkeley Bar, this person named Kelly, he was good friends with Michael Kennedy. He had dinner with Michael Kennedy often. Michael Kennedy told him what was going on. This editor was like, "Yo, fuck Tim Leary, man, fuck him." And he put together like a press conference, right? And this was like all very controversial within the underground, and people got split because before Leary went to jail, he was like that dude. They're like, "Leary's the man, we love Leary." And when although there were some dissenters too, like the diggers who thought Leary was just a loudmouth, but when he came out in 1976, he already kind of been like bad jacketed a little bit, right? So there were people who were wary of Leary, like in the Bay Area. They're like, "Oh, he put, people in jail," but he never did. One person got arrested out of him like talking or whatever, but it was on a tangential thing. When the feds arrested Leary, they wanted to use him to arrest people from the Brotherhood of Eternal Love, which was like a surf or group that like sold tons of LSD and weed, and they gave Leary money. They would break Leary off of money during his time. And that's why the feds wanted him, because they tried to set Leary up as the godfather of the Brotherhood of Eternal Love, as the dude calling the shots, when that wasn't the case at all. Leary was like an intellectual, you know what I mean? So my research tells me. I don't know if Leary was the godfather.
I guess one of the strongest CIA links, and this is not a financial link, but and you probably brought this up in the last time we talked, was Cord Meyer. And Cord Meyer was married to Mary Pinoche or something, and that she would do LSD with Timothy Leary. And there's a direct connection here, because her husband is a literal CIA agent, not like an alleged or assumed, an actual CIA agent that started at the OSS. And Tim Leary's doing LSD with his wife, and his wife Mary is also one of JFK's like sort of like side pieces. So there's this really interesting triangle between Timothy Leary, JFK, and an actual CIA agent's entire family. And I guess that one's not necessarily like they were funneling money in, but it almost indicates that it was like a known. He was a known figure that you would do LSD with or get information about, like all this kind of taboo subject, and that a lot of the overlap between the people that did get funded, that worked in the same areas as him at sometimes the exact same universities, that they were funded from these pools, but he was never necessarily directly related to any of that funding. And I guess it's another one of those things, like the links are not necessarily on paper, but to be direct friends with agents and direct friends, especially at a time, this is on the tail end of after the CIA owns what the world supply of LSD for like a decade or so from Lilly, right? From like the 40s leading into the 50s, the only place you were getting LSD was essentially through the government. And then it starts to leak out. And then you've got like these underground sort of operations, which then get turned into criminal enterprises, because again, as Robert Anton Wilson mentions in this series of articles, that it's almost like the government knows that they own a monopoly and they intentionally make it illegal to research certain things, because that gives them even more control over that. And then it's a genius play of events, because they're playing into their strength. Their strength is that they can make it illegal for you to look into, in this case, UFOs or ESP or psychedelics, to make it so they're the only ones that get the information.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of is like a theme of Wilson's too, is like he's an anti-monopolist, right? That goes across the board. He doesn't want anyone having a monopoly on anything, right? So that's, with guns, dope, patents, tariffs, everything, right? Everyone should have, a certain amount of equity, right? With Mary, Pinoche, I always, her pronunciation of her name, she's an interesting character, but, they didn't give Leary anything. She didn't even pay him for the acid. She would just show up and he gave her acid. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't even know if they fucked, but like, if they did fuck, why would Cord Meyer be there? You know what I'm saying? Was he in the corner somewhere? Like, did he?
I mean,
was when she was with JFK? I mean, that story is an interesting story, how she said that she was part of like a sort of crew of ladies who were tied into the upper echelon, who had kind of turned on to LSD, and they wanted to influence these world leaders to sort of world peace. Was Mary Pinoche, like, I mean, now we got into like the dynamics with her and her husband, like, were they was Cord Meyer like, yeah, fuck JFK, suck his dick, and then know, right?
We don't know the answers to these questions, but there's clearly, and this is me just, thinking off the top of my head, but you realize your wife is in tight with Timothy Leary. She's in tight with JFK. She now is your main asset. Like if I'm a company man and anything I do is ultimately for my country, because I'm a company man, well, now my wife is like a perfect sort of pawn piece. She's the perfect intersection between all these other topics that the CIA definitely cares about. They without question, I think I could say without any question, CIA is interested in psychedelics at around this time, from 50s to 70s, without question.
You're the first ones
without
to
question, they're interested in JFK, and they're also very interested in a honeypot style operation where you mix women with drugs with politicians, and you see what happens when you mix those three things together. So here we have Mary as that exact that catalyst that the CIA is constantly looking for, Operation Midnight Climax in one person. So those are the strings that connect in my own head, even if they're not necessarily like spelt out in an actual like sort of presentable case.
Yeah, no, it's cool going through it, man. Like Mary, I mean, well, this is the thing. I think that reading Wilson, I mean, he promotes this doubt, and not sure how many of his books you've delved into yet, but if you catch the flavor of it, I mean, this is a kind of Wilsonian conversation. Like, I mean, you're the ultimate spy master if you're able to do that too. Be like, hey, look at everything, but don't look at me, or like, look at me, but don't look over here. But it's like, man, how far? Here's for instance, like in the early 90s, Bob saw on that early internet that he had died. And there were a series of articles and condolences for the life of Robert Anton Wilson. And he basically read his own death online and started getting some concerned phone calls from friends. And he assured them he was all still alive. And then and an article came out that said Wilson died, but was replaced by a CIA cyborg. Okay. And so in his book, Cosmic Trigger, Volume 3, My Life After Death, this is like one of the themes of that book. He's like, did I die? And am I a CIA cyborg? And I don't know it? Getting very Philip K. Dickian. But the point of that book, and his point there too, is like, we have reached a phase, especially now, because it's 30 years after he wrote this book, where our technology, our communication technology, is able to create deep fakes and not AI yet, but deep fakes enough to completely alter our perception of reality by seeing something on the screen. So where Bob constantly goes with this stuff is like that old phrase, like, believe like half of what you see and none of what you hear, have this ultimate, like, his skepticism is what he said in the New Inquisition, like those people who were skeptics of SRI, like James Randi, were not even skeptical enough. They were fake skeptics. He represented the Zetetics, the true skeptics, because James Randi was part of that group, Psy-Cop. It's an interesting name, Psy-Cop, right? And their whole thing was about, we have to ridicule all these people who speak about psychic abilities because they're fucking stupid, and we know what's up because we're smart and we're on Johnny Carson and they're not, right? Although Uri Geller was bending spoons on Johnny Carson, right? But like, so the response was that, that.
Well, I wanted to ask you, have you ever seen the documentary on James Randi called An Honest Liar?
Yeah, it was pretty good.
So the whole premise, like what you just said, is that he's not even a good skeptic. It kind of is proven to be true in An Honest Liar, where someone had been lying to him for his entire life that was like living with him, and he didn't even realize it. So he was very myopically, critical of one specific thing, but it didn't apply. Like he wasn't necessarily a critical thinker across the board. It was specifically within this Randi challenge, anything that was paranormal related.
I mean, yeah, think about your own life. Like, how fucking critically across the board are you in every aspect of your life? It's an aspect of a critical mindset that can be promoted through learning, right? Like, and studying different forms of logic and critical thinking skills. Like, to be 100% skeptical about everything is almost just as foolish as being 100% believing about everything, right? So says Alfred Korzybski. Like, you need to figure out the percentages again, the gray areas, because that's the world that we live in. When we look at things on a page or on a screen and we're alone, these things seem separate and out there. But when you go out in life, you're interacting with people who have all different types of ideological viewpoints as you. And then if you succeed in different ways. You know, that Flannery O'Connor has that title. It's a great title. Everything that rises must converge. I mean, that's kind of like a physical fact. So, you know, the world is set up already in different ways, like a freaking pyramid scheme, right? So that's, if you're going up, you're interacting and meeting people. Did Joseph Campbell ever meet people in the OSS and the CIA? I'm sure he did. You know what I mean? And Bob talked to Joseph Campbell, like, well, how much of that CIA stain gets passed on, and some people don't even consider it a stain, right? Some people, the CIA is this great, amazing, like, you know, army for America, right? Like, but this is where we live in the real world, where we have to like constantly meet people, and if we want to get out there, you know, we have to know how to speak to people. This is, so according to Wilson, right? And negotiate and like make your way in the world. And the ultimate point is, you know, food, clothes, and shelter, man. How do you work to get your food, clothes, and shelter in mind? How do you help other people get their food, clothes, and shelter in line? It's not a hard proposition, you know, by, you know, expropriating, taking away, and exploiting people. That's not the way, you know what I mean? But back on, I guess, you know, someone who I think there is more evidence for, but I am constantly searching too. Like, I could be missing something about Wilson. I'm not going to claim I wasn't there with him, but I did, again, do a lot of this research. Like, if he's friends with, so here you go. He's friends with, at that time, Saul Paul Sarag, Jack Sarfati, and along comes this guy, George Koutman, right? Who, Sarfati and Saul Paul Sarag, and it's documented in the book How the Hippies Saved Physics, that Koutman was a mysterious fellow, and he liked to tell them that before he came on the scene as a funder, right? He for a short time during the 80s? It could have, no, in the late 70s, he worked at the Defense Intelligence Agency. He worked the kook desk. You know, he was like the Agent Mulder, if you will. And somehow he shows up in 1976, you know, hitting up Tim Leary and Jack Sarfati. And he hit up Jack Sarfati, according to Jack Sarfati, to set up like some workshops at Esalen Institute. Ultimately, Koutman kind of leaves him hanging, right? And drops out of the thing. But Koutman liked to carry around like a lockpick set. And he showed Sarfati and Saul Paul Sarag how you would just open doors with this lockpick set. He showed them like a letter from the military that said he was allowed to carry this lockpick set and use this lockpick set. He is probably most known in a way in terms of professional accomplishments as being like the creator of a rocket company. And he called it, was it American Rocket Company, right? And the acronym was AMROC, which is, you know, sounds very similar to the Rosicrucians acronym, which is AMORC, which stands for the Ancient Mystical Order of the Rosy Cross. Colorful character. He, you know, in 1980, he was a stunt coordinator on the Blues Brothers movie starring Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi. And according to Jack Sarfati, Koutman became friends with Dan Aykroyd.
Illuminati confirmed. There it is.
Jack Sarfati, how much of an investigative journalist? I don't know. I mean, he's giving his testimonial. So, in somewhere along the line, you know, Koutman, I guess, says that he wants to work with Tim Leary on his space migration scheme, which Leary, coming out of prison in 76, had this whole thing called SMILE, Space Migration, Intelligence Increase, and Life Extension, which is you know, he's written a series. He wrote a series of books exploring that whole idea. And Koutman ends up publishing a chapter in Leary's 1988 book. Well, it came out earlier. It was republished in Leary's book Neuropolitique, where Koutman writes about, creating mini orbital homes, off the surface of Earth, presenting it as sort of like a real estate prospectus. And Leary liked Koutman because here was a guy stepping up who had money, seemingly, but who had a rocket company. And Leary was serious about, exploring these sort of off-surface living habitats that actually, it was the design that was created by Gerard O'Neill, these little homes, if you will. And that's the same thing that Jeff Bezos is using now in his Blue Origin, whatever he's doing, trying to go off surface. It's the same exact sort of design that Gerard O'Neill created, right? Which I don't see like this thing of like, oh, well, anyway, that's a tangent. So back with Koutman, here you have a number of people speaking and Koutman himself is saying like, yeah, bro, I was a spook. I was in the DIA, and now I do this, and then I do this, and then I do that. I think that's kind of a sign of these sort of like kind of characters, right? They're able to do all these different sort of jobs, but they're not low-level jobs. They're like high up. I'm president of this company right now. Oh, I'm the stunt coordinator of Blues Brothers. How the fuck did you go from that to that, bro? Like, do you know what I mean? Like Hollywood, yeah, there's nepotism involved, but that's next level. And also Sarfati would say that like Koutman was like a total cokehead and he was like high all the time and shit like that. When I asked Saul Paul Sarag about George Koutman, because I interviewed Sarag a lot for my book, he was like, yeah, I believe he was there to sort of maybe babysit Tim Leary, but Sarag believed in Leary's like Bugs Bunny abilities, man, like to kind of outsmart this guy Koutman. And if Koutman was high on coke all the time, I mean, it might not be that hard to outsmart someone whose brain is snuffed up, Koutman ends up dying in a car crash at the age of 44 in Lancaster, California, just as his rocket company is kind of sort of really taking off. And his rocket company, Amrock, it fails, if you will, but designs, he's seen as a pioneer because he created these sort of hybrid kind of rocket boosters, if you will. Like it didn't use all the jet fuel, it used kind of hybrid stuff. So as a rocketeer, he's seen as someone who got his name on the wall. But I think there are various types of, I guess, people who are agents and spooks and stuff like that. I mean, but he's one who is, you would say, more known. I reached out to David Kaiser, the author of How the Hippies Saved Physics. I believe that's the name of the book, because he wrote about Koutman as well. And he said that he filed a Freedom of Information Act with the CIA and DIA. And of course, I read his footnotes, and because what he said, well, he got the same deal. Like, he's like, they might have denied it or said inconclusive or something like that. And I asked him about it. I was like, how hard did you push? And he was like, well, that's good enough, So, yeah, I mean, it's very difficult to see, right? Like who is who, but I see what you're getting at with, how funding may or may not work, but let's be clear on where exactly the funding is coming from. Leary was kicked out of institutions in the early 60s, so he wasn't receiving institutional funding. John Lilly, I don't think there's any proof that he's ever worked with the CIA or DIA. I mean, he worked at the National Institute of Mental Health, but yeah, his involvement in MK Ultra.
Well, I can actually, because I've got my own bias going into this, but the way that I've come across this whole field of research, and I guess the reason that I'm personally quick to fire off, right? Like I'm quick to draw when it comes to psychedelic research, just mental research. Because when you say National Institute of Medical Health, right? These organizations, all of the original research, from my understanding, it all started from looking into dementia praecox. It was essentially looking into dementia and schizophrenia and a whole litany of issues, mental issues specifically, that didn't necessarily have names yet. And this started in the 1930s or so. And essentially, to put your tinfoil hat firmly on your head right now, but from the 1930s until the 1940s going into 50s, almost all of this dementia, praecox, schizophrenia, psychedelic research was funded by the Scottish Rite Supreme Council Northern Jurisdiction. Then, as soon as the OSS gets created, they completely stop that funding. And then you can see that the funding gets like, now all of a sudden the CIA is picking up the exact same tab that this originally the Scottish Rite was doing. And the Scottish Rite research was all public. Like you can go back and read all these studies from the 30s to the 50s, and they clearly say thank you to the funding of the Scottish Rite, yada yada. And then after this transition between OSS and CIA being founded in the early 1950s, as soon as this happens, all of the programs continue. The doctors and the researchers that are working on these programs continue, but it's no longer publicly funded. It's no longer publicly putting any of the findings out. And a lot of these groups end up just getting funded. And it's not like the CIA writes the checks directly, but it's almost like the entire field of psychedelic and schizophrenia and dementia research just gets handed off to the government. And then the government funds it through any number of ways. You might say like the Rockefeller Foundation was one of the examples, Carnegie Foundation, like they kind of funnel it. And it's the same thing that Robert Anton Wilson mentions about this connection of the Lord Rothschild and the think tank, which then connects to the Rockefellers, which can, and the Rockefellers run the CFR. And he specifically calls them these American governments with handpicked servants, that the British and the Americans are just making sure that they put all the people in the right places. So I guess it's a much bigger, like a grand unification conspiracy theory that hinges on that transfer of psychedelic research and dementia research from the private industry, Scottish Rite, 33rd degree Supreme Council into government, and then the government just kind of takes over. That's my own bias going into this.
Oh, that's an interesting take. Yeah, that's something, definitely an interesting take on it, man. One that I think it's easy to find supportive evidence for. Who's a good guy to listen to or talk to about Leary specifically, and that realm of psychedelic research into the kind of wider conspiracy theory of behavior modification and whatnot, is a man named Robert Forte. And Robert Forte has been around. He was friends with Leary and Robert Anton Wilson and a lot of those heads.
40 Times or no?
No, different. He's still around. He's been speaking out the recent years about this sort of thing because he worked on he knew Gordon Wasson, right? So Gordon Wasson is one of those early popularizers of the psychedelic experience, right?
Who happened to be the VP of finance for Chase Manhattan Bank, or JP Morgan Bank, yeah.
Right. And so when Forte, was going through his papers, he found all these links to, intelligence agencies. And where Robert Forte landed, right, because again, he knew Leary, was that, and this is kind of the plot of the Illuminatus trilogy too. It's like, and in any sort of situation, like a weapon and a power, knowledge, right? Like when people get it, there's the notion of like those that want to hoard the thing and use it for their total control, which is what Bob is talking about in the Politics of Psi articles, especially part 4. And then there are those who are, you're out here, you're an individual, you have this, what I read from those articles is like, you have this ability to tap these higher potentials of yourself. If it's psychic remote viewing, so be it. If it's knowledge of epistemology and ontology and phenomenology, even better. You know what I mean? Like, but when you're able to, behave actively in your life, like that's the whole purpose. And that there are, groups, governments, and other groups that are there that just want to keep you down, right? And the whole goal is, how do you attain like personal, full 100% liberty in your life while respecting the liberty of others? Because we don't live in a world like that, right? There's, tons of jobs that focus around like the person working, like literally, like, Lenny Bruce had the old sketch about it, about the person that had to shovel the shit, and their job was to just shovel the shit all day. Like, that's not the best job in the world, so Wilson wants for people in his writing, like full abilities to, enact your full potential living while you are alive. And to free yourself, to pull the cord out of the matrix so you could behave on your own knowledge, wisdom, and understanding about the world, and not get caught up in different types of propaganda and whatnot, Well,
he quotes, OTO at length. I think it's Crowley, but he quotes OTO at length in these series of articles about the whole, like, love is the law and do as thou wilt, as long as it doesn't inflict on other people's rights. And he makes a really good case here that OTO is largely political. Like, all of those, they're talking about laws and they're talking about rights, and that it's highly political, and that essentially the Aleister Crowley's thinking was political, but that it itself came from like a 10th century. You mentioned like the Sufi wisdom, and then even that guy's dad was like a master Zoroastrian guru or something. So that this is some ancient knowledge that was originally like a revolutionary political concept.
Yeah, Wilson will take it, especially at that time, into this kind of libertarian area, right? Where it is about, Crowley had a kind of declaration, which was basically that, like, I forget the name of it exactly, but it's like the right to live as free as you, that is your right in this earth, to live as free as you possibly can. No one can judge you besides, this is what Crowley's saying, right? Wilson is referencing the Sufi poet and thinker Al-Hallaj, who is kind of known for that phrase Ya Haq, which means I am the truth, which at the time, meaning like I am God, I am the truth. For you to say that, just like in Christianity, then was like blasphemy, because God is supposedly outside of you. You cannot be God, right? Another thing Al-Hallaj did was, so he ended up being like killed, like burned at the stake or something, right? Like for some people said it was for that, but another thing that he did was, Muslims, you have to, make Hajj, and you have to encircle the Kaaba, the big black cube that today is in Saudi Arabia, but I don't think it was in earlier times. And what Al-Hallaj recommended to people was that if you don't have the money, because it costs money to travel to pay Hajj, like, you create a little thing in your house, make a little black cube, do your prayers around that, then go outside and give charity, give money, give food to the people in your community who are in need. And that is your Hajj. Like, that sounds like a beautiful thing. It's also a political thing. And he got put to death. And that could be one reason why he did that. But you see there is this kind of antinomianism, right? Antinomianism, where it's like this idea that, like, this is a much broader conversation now. Like, where does God reside, right? Can one be a representation of God? Can you be God, right? We speak about the government wanting to control psychic powers. I mean, the original control corporation were these organized religions, that were saying that people could believe this or believe that. And
he says in this article, Robert Anton Wilson says that the Holy Inquisition was the first drug enforcement administration, or they were like the FBI of the establishment magicians, which is such a great way of thinking about it.
Yeah, like how basically they were the ones who were all up in everybody's business and saying, like, well, you're not practicing Christianity properly, therefore we have to torture you and burn you at the stake and pummel your head with bricks and rocks until you die because you're not a good Christian. Like, this is what a lot of Christianity was for like centuries. You know what I mean? And actually that term, the New Inquisition, Wilson later his 1986 book, The New Inquisition, he makes that argument that people who were doing research in psychedelia ever since the government made it illegal were like these underground scientists who were escaping and evading this new inquisition, psychedelic and psychic research, because it was taboo and not, accepted and properly studied. With psychedelics, it's a different story today. It's getting more properly studied in an academic scientific framework. Psychic stuff. I mean, there are people still doing these experiments and whatnot, reporting results. It's a hot topic and conversation still to this day, whether people have these psychic abilities or not. But the point I want to make about Robert Forte was that what he says is that Leary was there. There's the crew, like the original CIA guys, that gets written about very well in that book called Acid Dreams. I recommend that book. It's a very good book. That's about that first generation of these whacked out, crazy dudes in suit and ties, but they're crazy maniacs, dosing each other, giving each other CIA without telling each other, just to see what happens. One scientist, that happened to him. He jumped out a window. His family later sued the CIA. Right. Jumped out a window. I mean, dude, if you're really high on acid, sometimes you're like, oh, fuck, what's going on?
Jumped out a double sealed bulletproof window that didn't have a way to open. That's the full sequence of events there. It wasn't like a window that you just walk out to and you lift it. It's on the top freaking floor. It was not a window that you could just casually open to get like some night air.
Good point. Very good point. Yeah. So like the conclusion of that book, sort of like Acid Dreams, is that these first generation CIA psychedelic guys, their set and setting was already paranoid. They were trying to use this thing as a weapon and a weapon of war and a truth serum, so they were already skewed, demented, broken people, but then the revolution of the 60s of people discovering that acid can be used to open up these amazing, beautiful sides of oneself. That's where Robert Forte speaks about, like, this was Timothy Leary's crew, and they were not accepted. You know what I mean? Like, Leary was seen as a maniac. He still shitted on, for the things that he spoke about. Yet in 1964, and this is ironic, twist of history, Timothy Leary sat in a Senate subcommittee hearing recommending to Ted Kennedy, RFK Jr.'s uncle, that psychedelics should be used in a medicinal format, and there should be therapists trained to give psychedelics to people to help them do LSD psychotherapy. Not that long ago, RFK Jr. made the news because he was saying that psychedelics should be used in a medicinal format. So it took 71 years, but Leary's message, or is it 61 years? Leary's message finally got home to the Kennedys. That
although I think maybe this is bias speaking a little bit too, but I almost like Timothy Leary was, whatever he said, he had a following. So something he says is inevitably going to be repeated. It's inevitably going to get reprinted in a book or a magazine article or something. So whether by design or wittingly or not, he kind of becomes a mouthpiece for here's what the rest of the world is now allowed to know about LSD. For example, Cary Grant was one of the very earliest people that was talking about using LSD therapeutically. He had a doctor, and the doctor had a direct connection to the military, and he had a supply that he could get LSD. His name was Dr. Mortimer Hartman, and he ended up charging Cary Grant $200 per LSD trip that he would come. And then Cary Grant starts spreading this around to all the other actors he knows. But this is in 1958, and Cary Grant starts becoming an advocate for LSD-fueled therapy sessions. So this is sort of something that had been known, but only at these very elite, like you had to be rich and you had to know Cary Grant or his inner circle to even get this reference. So by the time that Timothy Leary is suggesting this in public to the Kennedys, like actually in a public court, it almost feels just like a decade later of, okay, here's the next wave of, now it's not just going to be these elite Hollywoods that have military connections. Now it's available for anyone that's in college or anyone that's within this certain sort of demographic.
Yeah, I mean, I know the work of Oscar. I didn't hear the person that you mentioned, but I know that Oscar. It's hard to Janiger, this fella. He's listed as introducing Cary Grant to LSD, and I don't know if he had military connections or whatever, but it's not inconceivable. I mean, like you said, the military owned Eli Lilly owned.
They purchased the world supply from Eli Lilly of LSD 25 for like 2 years or so. I mean, this is what's reported in books like Acid Dreams, and I think in Terrible Mistake, which is the one that's a like 700-page biography on Frank Olson, the guy that got pushed out of the window. But this is one of those things that if you had access to LSD at all in the early 1950s, it was likely because you knew someone in the military and they had a connection to that original purchase, and they were just like, all right, we got the world supply, now what do we do with it? And like, just anything you can think of, like, check out a little vial. I mean, that obviously isn't what happened, but that feels like that was the sort of vibe at that time.
Yeah, I mean, like, so like theories that exist around the notion that LSD was bad or something. One supporting thing of that is it sort of dissolved the focused resistance from the left that was going on in the late 60s, early 70s to make some lasting changes in the country. I've heard people give that description of why LSD sucked.
Right.
I mean, have you done acid? I think what Leary would say too, what people would say was like, man, just do some fucking acid and find out. Like, is the CIA brainwashing you when you drop some acid? I've had some paranoid thoughts, but I don't think they're doing it through acid, man. Like, there's a lot of different areas and mediums, but again, this is saying this with the historical context totally in mind, man. Like, the where I sort of landed, and I think I agree with Robert Forte here, is that there was this early group, right? And these guys were paranoid, wanting to use LSD for warlike purposes. So, garbage in, garbage out, man. You know what I mean? Your set and setting is very important. Like, the intention that you have before a heavy psychedelic dose. This is what John Lilly figured out, is that, you can self-hypnotize yourself into different perspectives. You could get so paranoid on acid, you'll think that your door's being kicked down right now, by the secret military police. You know what I mean? Like, it's very easy to get caught in a bad trip, right? So what you learn on acid is just how powerful your mind is, right? And when you're not on acid, your mind is just as powerful, right? It's just able to, show a microscope about your level of where your perception forms. And it usually occurs at a level that's just below the way we use words. So it's the automatic thoughts that come out, the size of anger and desperation, just with little things when you run out of milk, all these little things. This is what Bob is trying to get through, to people. It's like, we're living in a psychic battlefield, if you want to look at it that way. It's just one metaphor, right? Like, but just be aware that there are all these little things that could kind of like cut you in small little ways, so if you're able to stay focused, right, on, and aware of like how you yourself form perceptions in every moment. And if you're aware of your preconceptions, because there's a lot of people who are not even aware of, their prejudices and preconceptions, because the defense around that is like, man, everyone's cool with me, but like, oh, those guys are assholes. It's like, well, that's your preconception. That's your prejudice, like, so I think that's where Wilson's trying to go with his method a lot, is like, study this area where we form these thoughts, right? But I think you have to look at history with as cold an eye as possible. I mean, these are great interrogations, but there are people who have done it, right? So again, Robert Forte, like, he's someone who knew all these people. He's been immersed in that world for decades, and again, he says that he thought Leary was not kind of part of that shitty cabal of, power hungry people. Was he a useful idiot? Was he used in this and that? I mean, maybe not, right? Like I tried to put that ambiguity in my book, right? Like Chapel Perilous, Life and Thought Crimes of Robert Anton Wilson, that like that scene where Bob and Leary are in New York City in the early 90s, and there's people handing out, they're speaking at a virtual reality event, and there's people outside handing out flyers that said Bob and Leary were in the CIA, and Leary looks at the flyer and laughs. He's like, if I was, they never paid me, right? And there could be groups of people who are never paid by the CIA and completely used and exploited by
that's such a skeptical note to me, because it's like, well, if the metric is did you get money, and if you didn't get money, then you can be like, see, I was never a member. I don't know. It feels like, well,
yeah, but wasn't that the metric that you just put out there though, right? Like getting funding through institutions, like, so that's one form of
funding, and I guess also being allowed to play in this space in exchange for maybe not money, but, and I guess in Leary's case, this is the exception. Like, as long as you play by the rules, you don't go to jail for this thing that we clearly have a monopoly over. So therefore, if you're able to experiment in this area, you're either doing it within the confines of these rules that we've set out, and if you ever venture outside of those confines, then you get into legal trouble. Hence Timothy Leary running afoul of the law in so many different ways.
Yeah, I mean, this happens. Let's do another contrast here of another kind of celebrity from that time, 60s into the 70s, who it is confirmed worked with the CIA. Yet she never has this never follows her much. It's not the first thing that people say immediately after hearing her name. And it's Gloria Steinem. Gloria Steinem is probably remembered most or known most as a famed feminist. She started Miss Magazine, which was I don't know if it's still around, but a very successful magazine. Had a, long, high-standing career as a journalist. Like, she got a lot of attention. The attention that she got was pretty much always favorable in news media interviews and reports and whatnot. And she's seen as like an icon for women. Early in her career, she helped with a CIA festival where this was part of the Cold War propaganda. Like, so the CIA would show that America's about liberty and free choice, as opposed to the evil empire, Russia, who they don't have cool music because they don't really have cool music. Well, maybe more today now, but during that time, there was no punk rock, I don't think, out there. Like, so America had better music, and the CIA was like, we want to get, people in these other countries to like America and American culture. This was the soft, quote unquote, power, the cultural Cold War, that was being played. Gloria Steinem played a major part in one of these sort of festivals. She stayed connected to someone who was in the CIA, who ends up, and you get this a lot too, the Carl Bernstein, who was, one of the persons who broke Watergate. He wrote an article one time in the 70s or 80s about Operation Mockingbird, which was the CIA operation that placed all these agents and news agencies, and how there was always someone, and let's circle back to Anderson Cooper, you know what I mean? Like, and so I don't know, but like, this is a tradition that's been done. So Gloria Steinem ends up being, a good friend with this person. I don't have his name off the top of my head, who was in the CIA and also high up in these news agencies, as was Cord Meyer. Cord Meyer was in the, publications. He owned, I don't know, one of these things. But, and he, in other words, but Gloria Steinem, her career was like flower petals and like red. She was treated so nicely by the media, in other words. Contrast that with Timothy Leary. You can see it's awesome. They're on YouTube, like all these different times, few times that Leary's being interviewed, few times. He wasn't interviewed a lot on major network sort of things, and was some late night. There's one example of a late night talk show host interviewing Leary, and he basically does the same thing. He bad jackets him. He blames him for LSD happening in the first place. He gets treated like shit, you know. Does that happen with a useful idiot who's no longer useful? I mean, he really pissed Richard Nixon off enough. He pissed off enough people in the higher echelons of the government. You know, I guess he pissed a lot of people off, man. Like,
well, you're in the right spot to talk about Gloria Steinem and the CIA connection. That's something that I haven't done a full episode on it yet, but it's probably worth it. But it's like she had an acceptable narrative that was being well crafted. For example, you're like, hey, look at how free we are. We're so free in the States, more free than you are, that look, we'll just destroy the nuclear family. Watch, here, this is how free we are. And that was sort of that's the tinfoil hat CIA angle of why was Gloria Steinem allowed to be so public and not get bad jacketed the same way as others, because she continued to toe the line indefinitely. And that particular line was this disintegration of the family unit and more towards statism. Like, don't trust your mom and dad, trust the state. And here's Gloria Steinem with more.
Right on. Yeah, well, I mean, I'll follow you up until that part. I've never thought of that. I don't consider that part of it, that she was an agent to destroy the nuclear family. But I view it as a cultural thing that kind of is just happening, man. Like Arthur Miller, the playwright, once wrote, "America destroys families," you know, so.
Well, I think it might be more of like this person is in the race and they're doing really well in the race. Let's back that person. It would be the same F1 racers or NASCAR racers. You're like, hey, that car is consistently in the top 10. Let's go ahead and just sponsor that car. So when they get somewhere, people see our branding or we have some sort of influence. So it might not, I don't really think in black and white terms where someone sat down, they're like, all right, we need to spread feminism. We need to break up the family unit. That lady seems good. Let's get her to do it. It's more like, let's see who's already doing really well. The same way that I think MK Ultra worked. It's not like CIA agents went into a university and they're like, all right, we want you to record a phrase on a tape and play it for people. And here's this research we've got. It was just like, hey, that guy over there is doing something kind of cool. Let's just throw a little bit of extra funding his way. Let's make sure that doors open for this guy so that his research is unimpeded, because what he's trying to do could be, sort of like synergistic with what we're trying to do. And I think maybe that same thing happens to, say, Gloria Steinem. Maybe it happens to someone like Timothy Leary, maybe not him himself, but like that, where it's like, hey, this guy is doing things that we're interested in. Let's just like let him take this down a little bit farther than he could by himself. And then in Timothy Leary's case, it's like, whoa, not like that. Okay, let's go ahead and put some boundaries around this guy.
Right. Yeah. And like, you know, how much funding exists, how many departments exist in that organization to dedicate, these efforts to different people and whatnot. That's a thought I have. I like what you're saying, though. I agree. I think that there's definitely, as intelligence agents, that's what they do. They surveil. So, I mean, the CIA surveilled more than Tim Leary. Seymour Hersh he broke the story as well that was called Operation Chaos. I write about it in my book, where the CIA was surveilling, keeping tabs on American citizens during the 19th.
Right. This was the CIA's version of COINTELPRO, essentially. It was to infiltrate extremist groups that, in their eyes, that were building influence just to have an inside man to let you know where everything was a long time. And the reason that one was apparently salacious wasn't because the CIA was infiltrating. It's because the CIA is not supposed to act domestically, but they were able to tie it into like, well, they've got connections to foreign agents. Therefore, this is now within CIA jurisdiction.
Yeah. And you see how easy it is to go therefore, and again, like, I think this is one of the values of Bob's work, Robert Anton Wilson's work is, and my book is forwarding the notion of sharpen your critical thinking skills, because how did MK Ultra start? Allen Dulles in 1953, April 10th, 1953, gave a speech to various governmental whoever the fucks called Brain Warfare. And he spoke about the brainwashing of American POWs at the hands of the Koreans in the Korean War. It wasn't conclusive that these men were really brainwashed, right? The evidence not very clear. Many say it was extremely shaky grounds that the Koreans were really brainwashing these men. But for Allen Dulles, it didn't matter. And he said that America needed to get even better at brainwashing than the Koreans or the Soviets or whoever. So
yeah, there was even a chance that they were doing it successfully, then that means that we were behind already. Like we had to make up for whatever we've been sleeping on. This is also one of the same explanation, a quasi-official explanation of the original steps in MK Ultra to test psychedelics was that they went into Dachau concentration camp and they found reports that they were using mescaline in order to interrogate some of the prisoners of war there. And that's on paper supposed to be the first time that the CIA or the OSS was like, they're doing what now? We need to do that. We need to go and find hell, we've got mescaline. We've had it since the 1880s at least.
Yeah. Yeah, man, when you look at now, these are two things where, you know, U.S. military, CIA, governmental institutions have FOMO, major FOMO, and you're never supposed to make moves off of FOMO. You know, that fear of missing out. They had a fear of missing out on all the psychic research. That did they do conclusive due diligence to really make sure? Did they do a preliminary intelligence test, study of these supposed results that these Soviet psychics had? They did not. They went right to it. They're like, we need funding. And that's a whole other thing too now. If we're talking all this stuff, here's a conspiracy right in front of our faces that it's not even called a conspiracy, and it's the military-industrial complex. This behemoth has grown to gargantuan proportions, even more now in the last few years. That's the conspiracy. Do you know what I'm saying?
I would argue now it's the military-industrial entertainment complex.
It's
like now that you've got because for a while the CIA working with Hollywood was like hush hush. You weren't supposed to know about that. But now it's advertised. Now a movie will come out and it's like, we had CIA give us notes on this movie, and people are like, oh my God, it's going to be so realistic. I need to see that. So now there's like a convergence where having CIA funding gives you more credibility to the rest of the audience, right? They're like, oh man, well, if the CIA is funding this thing, it's got to be good. Right,
Hollywood, CIA, Fargo, and then let's bring up another Matt Damon, the Bourne movie.
Argo.
Yeah. Oh, Argo. Right, I called it Fargo. My bad. Yeah. Well, then here's.
Although you could argue Fargo maybe too.
Well, isn't it? Well, this is the stuff that's really coming out now. I think it's not just Hollywood CIA, but like Mossad. Hollywood Mossad. Let's look at this. One of the most successful executive producers of the 1990s to the early 2000s, he started Regency Films, which put out Fight Club, which was a very kind of countercultural sort of movie. Really, got me going when I first watched it. Man named Arnon Milchan. Arnon Milchan he's a billionaire living in Israel. He made his money in Hollywood, went back to Israel. He's Israeli. He came to Hollywood. His whole cover the whole time. Now let's think of Uri Geller again. His cover was as a Hollywood producer, but what he was really doing, he was a major weapons runner for Israel, and it's alleged. I don't know if it's been proven, but maybe that he played a major part in the Israeli espionage of stealing the nuclear plans from America and getting it going in Israel. So Arnon Milchan, he, talk about open secrets. People knew probably that people knew that he was running guns, if you will. So compare him to, say IRA gun runners that, in America. They're getting sent to jail. They're getting 7 years in prison when they were caught. because
I don't
they
know
were
if you're
not
familiar
supported by
with
the government.
Are you familiar with Tracy Twyman's work at all?
No.
So Tracy Twyman writes on a bunch of stuff. She gets really big into the intersection of military, occult, and sort of psychedelics in Hollywood, like this whole little blend. And she actually had this really good point. I can't remember what I think the article was, the story of Minnie Moose. And she's talking about how the intelligence agencies realized pretty quickly, and mafia, they realized that Hollywood actors, especially ones that were popular, they actually could give this starstruck feeling to people that were checking you going on and off your airplanes. That if they were there to like make sure you weren't running guns and drugs, if all of a sudden Marilyn Monroe is the person that you're checking, or it's Frank Sinatra, or fill in the blank, that maybe they don't want to impose, so they might not pat you down as much. They might not insist on checking all your stuff because, oh my God, my wife's a huge fan. Will you sign this? And that at some point in this convergence of Hollywood and military ops, someone put that together. They're like, oh my God, we can put drugs and guns and people in these limos on these private jets of these Hollywood people, and they elicit this sort of compliance. They have a built-in rapport that you don't have to build up, that doesn't necessarily come with a doctor or a politician or just some rich guy, but that this almost made them the perfect mules to send things internationally.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure she spent some time like investigating all of this, my mind thinks of different things but I hear, Hollywood CIA, which Argo was a example of, the normalization of, kind of military mindset, these set consultants on whatever shows. I mean, to begin with, Hollywood seemed kind of started in the 30s and 40s. I saw rewatched this movie I haven't seen in years, but this Warren Beatty movie, who I like Warren Beatty, like this movie called Bugsy, which was about Bugsy Siegel,
right?
The Jewish American gangster, who also gave money to the Irgun, the Israeli terrorist groups, in the 50s and whatnot, when they're fighting out there. But Bugsy Siegel is sort of this kind of epitome of like this, Hollywood flash of this convergence of like, mob money, underworld money that needs to be washed through various productions, and so the mobsters, this isn't what the movie was about, but this is like the setup. Mobster's girlfriend, he hits up the director and says, get my girlfriend in, and then this is a great example too of like the fungible versus non-fungible thing, right? Because people say more and more, it's become a thing. I don't know, over the last 10 years, less sure, people in Hollywood have done some shitty things. Harvey Weinstein is a disgusting, gross ogre rapist who also utilized ex-Mossad agents in the form of Black Cube to spy, surveil, and harass women that he raped. Rose McGowan was an example of this organization being used on her. And Black Cube was a private military intelligence organization. So yeah, pretty prickly stuff in the Hollywood world. But it starts out, Hollywood itself, right, as like this glamorization of like these 1930s gangsters. These movie stars are hanging out with mobsters and kind of portraying them like the original Scarface movie, like goes down the line, right? Like so many great movies from the 30s into the 40s. And that strange sort of like marriage, if you will, of like a contentious place. Las Vegas, Bugsy Siegel plays a major part in that. The birth of Las Vegas, this kind of, America sort of, lives for decades with this underworld that exists, the mafia, that they're shadowy figures, conspiratorial figures. Are they doing this? Are they doing that? There wasn't even the name for it wasn't even spoken until like the 60s when RFK Jr.'s dad, RFK, the original, the better RFK, grilled at the like McClellan subcommittee hearings, like, grilled these different, Valachi, these different mobsters, and what is the mob, right? And so, yeah, we're speaking now, we're getting to a deeper level. Wilson writes about this a little bit in his writing about the propaganda Due scandal of the 1980s, which was this convergence of mobsters, both in Italy and in America, CIA agents and other agents, Mossad and British and whoever, and high-level financial crimes, and the Vatican. And that was going on in the 80s.
God's banker. It was about the guy that they called God's banker.
Yeah. Roberto Calvi, known as God's banker, was found dead, hanging under Blackfriars Bridge in 1982, June 1982. They made it seem like he was killed by Freemasons because he was hanging like from one leg he was hanging from his throat, but he had his pockets filled with bricks, which was some Masonic thing if you give up the secrets of the Masons. But it turns out he was really just killed by the mob, right? And so now we're focusing in on this part now, like when we're analyzing these worlds, right? Like, like you said earlier, the CIA or the US military, they heard rumor that the Soviets were building up this and building up that. So then they went and they did physical shit. You know what I mean? They were thrown off their square. Really? They were pump faked. So when all this money and all this funding got dumped into all this stuff. Yeah, but who's making money off that to begin with? All these little monies that go missing, that go into the pockets of people involved in the military industrial complex, weapons manufacturers, this and that. Before 9/11 happened, what was it? There was trillions of dollars missing. No one knew. Cynthia McKinney, the congresswoman at that time in 2000 and 2001, she was grilling Donald Rumsfeld before 9/11 happened. Where are these trillions of dollars that we just audited the Pentagon? Where did this money go? Right? Like, this isn't new to MAGA trying to figure out and cleanse the swamp. Cynthia McKinney was trying to do that in 2000. Activists on the left have been trying to do that since the 60s. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, but what constantly seems to happen, and bringing it back to the Politics of Psi articles, is it is weird. It is weird how there are people like who are highly involved in cult stuff, also highly involved in military shit, like high-ranking military, this and that, and they're fucking like the Temple of Set. They, Michael Aquino, he's some military guy and he's in the Temple of Set. But I don't want to mention real names because I know there's a lot of conspiracy theories about Michael Aquino and stuff. Like, I don't want to get into that because I don't know much about that stuff. You know what I mean? Like, but that's my point, though.
Oh, that's a good example, though, because that one gets conflated as if Michael Aquino is a military officer. True. Michael Aquino founds the Temple of Set, which is a break off of the Church of Satan with Anton LaVey. That's true. But then there's this connection that doesn't necessarily exist de facto, where it's like, well, that's proof that the military was funding black magic. It's like, because the military gave him a paycheck and then he took his paycheck and he's like, I'm going to spend this on hookers and black magic. It doesn't necessarily mean the military was spending their money on hookers and black magic. It was going through Michael Aquino as like a conduit, but that it wasn't a direct fund. But I mean, that's where it gets dicey across the board. Even when we go back to like, okay, let's replace black magic with psychedelics. It's sort of the same story over and over again.
Yeah. And like, I just want to stay on Robert Anton Wilson, like bring it back to him. Like, like this notion of doors opening for you, right? So if you're, other writers have talked about this, like, Eric Davis, the writer I saw him mention something like this. It was what you were saying earlier, that if you see some of these writers or journalists or academics and all these doors are opening, right? You could get conspiratorial, think conspiratorially. There's plenty of evidence to back up stuff. Let's just say Hollywood casting couch notions, like to mix a metaphor, if you will, like, the way to get cast in a movie, if you're an actor and you can't depend on nepotism, you have to train, get your acting skills up. Because I always find it entertaining, man. People talk shit about Hollywood and actors and this and that. Like, you try it, man. Someone stick a camera in your face, action. Say the lines as this different person. You know what I mean? It's like, I remember going to baseball games as a kid and I would talk shit, right? Like, but some people really love just talking shit about baseball, how much they suck. This guy sucks. It's like, you can't even swing a bat, bro. You know what I mean? Like, slow your roll.
The armchair coaches out there, yeah.
Yeah, you know, and so this is the line that we have to walk, because this interesting capacity that the human mind has, right? When we're watching anything online on this, it's so easy to talk shit. Hey, this guy, that, what a dumbass.
But I think I have a good sort of refutation to, at least, and I'm not saying this isn't like an argument, but it's also implying, well, then does that mean that my boxing coach needs to be able to beat me up at boxing in order to give me valid advice on how to be a better boxer? No, right? Because was every single coach Mike Tyson ever had, could they beat him up? Probably not, but they could tell him, like, hey, I recognize this ability that I can help you harness because I know how this is supposed to work. Even if I can't do it myself, I can help you do it. The same way with like an orchestra conductor, it'd almost be like, you sit down and play the violin and the tuba and the piano all at the same time because that's what you're telling us to do. Well, it's like, sometimes you do have that elitist sort of level of knowledge where you can delegate a very complex set of events to a whole bunch of different players, even though you yourself are not capable of doing any of those individual roles.
Oh yeah, for real. Delegators, idea men, different types of intelligences that people have. More analytical versus more hands-on and stuff like that. But my point is this habit at times to hate, to just hate on motherfuckers just because they're there right now. And Tim Leary got a lot of hate, and Robert Anton Wilson, he wasn't as well known, but in terms of his, where he was with all this stuff and what he was ultimately or whatever, it's, he even talks about it. Like, there are things that are indeterminate and you're always bringing in new information. I will probably for the rest of my life still be investigating the life of Robert Anton Wilson, seeing if I could find things that might contradict what I thought,
Well, let me ask you this, and I'll use this to kind of bring us home. And this is directly from the Politics of Psi series of articles. And Robert Anton Wilson mentions in here, and this is somewhat verbatim, and he mentions Ishmael Reed, and he references this book that he wrote called Mumbo Jumbo. And the way that Robert Anton Wilson describes this quote, he says, in his hilarious and profound novel. So the hilarious part is doing a lot of work there. And I want to ask your opinion. The quote from Mumbo Jumbo by Ishmael Reed is, "The history of the world is the history of the warfare of secret societies." And when Robert Anton Wilson mentions this is from a hilarious, profound novel, it's hard for me to get a read on it. Does Robert Anton Wilson agree that the history of the world is the history of warfare of secret societies? Or is it funny because that's like an oversimplistic way of looking at things? Or is it funny because of how spot on it is, yet how controversial it might be?
Yeah, I think it's looking at that statement is a good example of what Wilson liked and tried to practice, this thing that he got from general semantics called indexing, right? In order
What's general semantics?
General semantics was a field of study that Wilson got really into after reading this book by Alfred Korzybski called Science and Sanity. Wilson read it in 1948 at the age of 16, and it kind of became like his philosophical underpinning, his critical thinking underpinning for the rest of his life, pretty much. He read it once a year. Giant book, huge book. This is the book. This is the book. He said he read this at 16 in a weekend. this
I'll
book.
have ChatGPT summarize it for me later.
Yeah, well, in many ways, it's been already the main point in some ways of that big giant book is, for the most part, saying that there's nothing absolute in and of itself. We live in sort of like a flux process, like reality. However, the words we use to describe reality constantly misalign with how things, flow, if you will. The example is that how we still utilize this notion of either or, like what Aristotle called the excluded middle, right? There's no room. So someone is either this or that. There's no gray area, right? Events are either this or that. There's no gray area. This is a very simple explanation. However, especially 19th and 20th century science has constantly proven otherwise. The fields of operationalism, where they find that scientific experiments are not always the result, are not always the same when done at different points of the day. So operationalism is you have to describe your experiment and contextualize it in the present moment as much as possible. And science is pointing in this direction more and more. So general semantics, in other words, like offers all these different ways to like constantly contextualize like the moment, because every moment is unique and different from the moment before. Every individual, everyone has a different thumbprint, right? Everyone has a different brain. However, this is one of Bob's biggest philosophical points, is that we live in this point of human evolution, Homo sapiens sapiens, this being that has been around for, 40,000 years, maybe more, right? But our whole frame, like if we take Darwin's evolution, right? We evolved from bipeds, we evolved from monkeys, you know what I mean? Like, and parts of our brain have been in this form before Homo sapiens sapiens have been around. So our forebrains, like the bipeds before us, had the same brain. We're still evolving, yet the past is still a mystery. We're constantly exploring what the hell is going on. Every single one of us on this planet, no one knows 100% what the fuck is going on. And as Wilson said, if anyone tries to explain to you that they know exactly what is going on, they're probably an asshole, right? And so when it comes to that notion of Israel Reed's quote, the history of the world is the history of warfare between secret societies. Yeah, Bob really liked that quote at the time. He actually used that quote as the opening quote for Illuminatus trilogy. That's sort of like his book with Robert Shea that was published in 1975. The history of the world is a history of warfare between secret societies. So that immediately complicates the situation, right? Because Illuminatus trilogy was, in one sense, parodying this viewpoint of the Illuminati that groups like the John Birch Society held, right? Which Wilson thought were reactionary, kooky, far out ways of, thinking about things. They also parodied Nesta Webster, which he thought was a racist, and they were parodying this notion of one solid, continuous group that has existed for hundreds of years and has never been totally exposed or discovered. Wilson was parodying that in Illuminatus trilogy. So what he was saying was there are multiple groups behind the scenes vying and fighting with each other, and we only see a part of that on the outside world. I think that coincides with what these investigative journalists constantly uncover. And that's the realm. You have the underworld realm, where underworld activity produces hot money. You're a pimp making money, prostitution. Well, you're whatever. You're drug running, you're gun running, you're getting money that you're not supposed to get. You have to launder that money. That's hot money. These big time criminals, drug dealers launder it into real estate. You know what I mean? And that hot money turns into stable economy. But we've reached this point in the world where more hot money exists than money in the civil society. This is a problem. This is a major issue, that we all face, right? But what that shows though is you have all these different groups, organizations. They're not just governments, they're groups of people, special interest groups. They keep their money in offshore accounts, so that shit is never touched. They try to keep as many things, hoarding as many signals as possible and giving out as little as possible, and all of this creates this world of false scarcity, conspiracy theory, conspiracy, and corruption and enshittification, and basically where the world is today in a lot of ways.
Well, the reference to Nessa Webster is actually a really interesting one because Nessa Webster was one of the first people in the 20th century, just because of when she was alive, that was really harping on the Bavarian Illuminati. She was keeping that name alive for quite a while. So when you're talking about him referencing the John Birch Society and Nessa Webster, and that it was almost a parody at some levels of invoking the name Illuminati, because it was like, how silly is it that this one group or this one movement can be intact over centuries and keep this thing going? Yet, and maybe I'm not reading through like the levity of how he's writing in this, but in the Politics of Psi, he also sort of implies about how the OTO was in turn inspired by the Sufism, and that the Knights Templar brought Sufi magic into Europe, and that this continuation essentially gives us the OTO. So on one hand, it's like, how silly is it that we think an organization from the 18th century still has some sort of say or put this ball in motion that we're still seeing in the 21st century. But then on the other hand, in the same article, like, oh yeah, Knights Templar, brought Sufism in the 10th century, and then that turns into European occultism, and that turns into OTO. So on one hand, it's like, to stitch together 10 centuries is silly on one hand, but then like somewhat understandable on another. Or was there parody on both sides of that, do you think?
No, I mean, well, what happened was that, and this is why I bring up indexing. So indexing is one of the techniques from general semantics to kind of help you stay in the moment with things and not let your preconceptions get ahead of you. And so what that means is you have to take everything at its face value in every moment. So the Thomas of today, like if you're indexing every day, you put, Thomas of August 18th, 2025. And this Thomas, it's scientifically proven, you are a different person than who you were 12 years ago, 20 years ago, and you will be a different person in 10, 20 years time. Like we live in this like spectrum of flux, like just physically, we are going to change. Like if
I'm not confined to the linear progression of time, but I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. I mean, well, what I'm saying is that the argument is this sort of process philosophy, this flux, this view of flux that there's nothing absolute to a degree. We are essential. You reflect who you hang out with. The people that you hang out with reflect who you are as well. Do you know what I'm saying? Like the people that you choose to hang out with, let's say, but bringing it, this is one of the arguments of Korzybski, general semantics. Tim Leary also came upon this as well with his work with group therapy.
Right as you were saying that, I was like, and if I'm Tim Leary and I'm doing acid with the CIA guy's wife, then that's the company that I keep.
Yeah, well, I mean, the CIA guy's wife was trying to. Do you think she was telling Cord Meyer that she was fucking JFK? I mean, because she was. It's more scandalous, I think.
He might have been telling her to do it.
Cord Meyer?
He might have been telling her to do it. Yeah,
maybe.
I mean, get me a nice promotion if you can get in there.
But what happened to her? She was mysteriously killed. She was like thrown down the flight of stairs in Georgetown, and James Jesus Angleton like went to her house and took her private diary and shit like that. And he's the main maniac within the CIA at that time, right? Like, so yeah, she's very tied in. But to say that Cord Meyer was telling her what to do, there's no evidence for that.
No, of course, yeah, we have absolutely no evidence
saying that. So yeah, but this notion of indexing, right? So Wilson in Illuminatus trilogy, he wrote that book in 1969 to 1971, right? He mentions this a lot in his writing, especially Cosmic Trigger Volume 1, which comes out in 1977. he had to wait like 5 years for the book to finally get published, right? In that course of the 5 years, his viewpoint of the Illuminati shifts, right? When he's writing Illuminatus trilogy, this is all a gag, man. It's part of, Discordianism. Let's have some fun. Let's make the paranoids more paranoid. Like, let's, entertain ourselves. But he also him and Shea used political paranoia and paranoia in a very good way, used it very well. Otherwise, the book would not be still spoken about in such an underground phenomenon as Illuminatus trilogy is. He used the paranoia trope in the same way that Philip K. Dick uses the trope of alien invasion. The whole point is to elicit a sense of uncertainty and unease in the reader. We've evolved too, like through the use of our communication mediums, so people get more bored than ever reading a book. Jesus Christ. So, but like if you read Illuminatus trilogy, it's an experimental text. It cuts off mid-sentence and goes from one scene to another. It's an interesting read. But again, Wilson's viewpoint of the Illuminati at that time of writing that book was, let's just, I don't really believe it. It's a trope. It's a literary trope, the Illuminati. According to Wilson, then the Illuminati came and went 1776 to 1783. But Wilson was constantly turning ideas over and going back again and being like, well, maybe the Illuminati was something else. So he started doing that when he began his Crowleyan curriculum, when he started walking the thelemic path, if you will. He started practicing thelemic magic, all with the intention to have this experience, perhaps, to have this knowledge and conversation with this holy guardian angel, which, as I said earlier, he had in July 22nd or 23rd, 1973, just weeks after having this spontaneous remote viewing experience that synchronistically, CIA spooks were also doing remote viewing experiments up the road, well, miles away. How many people were shooting around in the astral plane? But by the time Wilson publishes Cosmic Trigger Volume 1 in 1977, this is his chronicle. This is his new journalism. Cosmic Trigger Volume 1 is a classic. I think it should be stamped with the classic label, like Penguin Classic, because it's not what he's saying like as it stands to today. There's a lot of things that Wilson wrote, even in the New Inquisition, that doesn't stand the test of time today, right? He even says that in interviews in the late 90s. He's like, Cosmic Trigger, I don't even believe that stuff anymore. But I'm not going to tell my readers that, because I want them to go along the journey and make, read the book and like go down this path of exploration, right? What was the Illuminati? And so Wilson really started questioning, the origins and the organizations of this shadowy organization called the Illuminati. And the result is seen in Cosmic Trigger Volume 1. That's a different Wilson. This is where indexing comes in. The Wilson who wrote Illuminatus trilogy, his mind has a different conclusion on who or what the Illuminati were than in 1977 when he publishes Cosmic Trigger Volume 1. And so he, of course, published The Politics of Psi in the fall of 1975. So he was in it. He was in his sort of Chapel Perilous years specifically. He emerges in the late 70s, and by the time he moves to Ireland in 1982, he still has an interest in these things. He's not practicing Crowleyan magic per se. He's writing amazing literature and soaking up Irish literary culture. He's practicing the magic of Guinness and Jameson, but these things are important to look at when looking at someone's life, because people change. Back on the acting aspect, the great acting teacher Stanislavski, the first amazing acting teacher who taught the method or whatever, right? In modern era, he had 3 different stages of his view of acting. Right. And it's much like these religious schools, right? People take the tradition given at one period of time from Stanislavski, and that was Lee Strasberg, who did the Strasberg Institute. And part of that was him like abusing the shit out of like students or something, like yelling at them or whatever. But along comes Stella Adler, who was another amazing actress, who she hung out with Stanislavski in the last years of his life. And she came back to America and she was like, I have the real method. Strasberg is teaching the old shit, right? And so Stanislavski is revealing truths at different stages of his life. Do they contradict each other at times? Yeah. Like, and does what Bob is writing in 75 in those articles contradict where Wilson was at in 2005 with like maybe some of his views towards those things? Yeah, maybe. You know what I mean? But yeah, I mean, he's a human being. He's not, you know what I mean? He's like, I'm trying to thankfully just give the biography, you know. I'm not trying to defend many of his ideas. I want to explore his ideas and see what truth resides in them. And you know, I know that reading his work inspired me to go out and discover more about life and kind of duck the people who I thought were spooky, you know, because you go out in this life, they're all about, man. People are all around, you know, and but that's from the knowledge, maybe perhaps gained from reading Wilson, because one of the great things that he puts out there is like altered states of consciousness, right? Knowing yourself in different states of consciousness, that you literally are like a different person when you have different hormones and your secretions happening in your brain and body, right? So for me, and I think a number of readers, one of Wilson's main lessons is, you know, true knowledge of self, which was the goal of you know, since ancient Greece, like learn yourself, learn what it's like to be.
Was Robert Anton Wilson a 5%er?
No. I knew 5%ers though. And I think that's maybe where some of the metaphors come in. But knowledge of self, I mean, knowledge of self, the 5%ers, you know, that goes back to the Plato, like know thyself, right? Yeah, 5%ers. But yeah, so I mean, I think, you know, I mean, again, I Wilson and the CIA and all these kooky places, I mean, it's interesting to really see like cultural fabrics that have been created. But here's another thing too, just as the US military and the CIA, they, you know, Alan Dulles created MK Ultra with Sidney Gottlieb because of supposed rumors or, you know, shaky grounds, right, for brainwashing. Well, maybe because they just wanted to wash some brains themselves, you know, like, but how much have these organizations like the CIA also over bluffed themselves to the general public to make it seem like they have even more behind the scenes knowledge?
Oh yeah, I mean, to horribly paraphrase, I think it was a William Colby quote. It was like, we'll know when the CIA has done its job when everything that the American people knows is a lie, or something like this. Like that was the ultimate goal of absolute domination.
Yeah. It's since World War II, there have been so many propaganda campaigns aimed at other people and the American citizenry. This is another point that Wilson makes in his book, his second to last book, SOG, The Thing That Ate the Constitution, is that Americans have been getting such faulty misinformation for so many decades. This is one reason why so many people are crazy, you know?
Well, I'm glad that we've moved beyond propaganda in the 21st century. We don't do that anymore. That's like something that our grandparents and maybe our parents got into, but we've evolved way beyond that.
Oh yeah, nobody's crazy today.
Well, and you said too, like maybe this is a lifelong thing of looking into Robert Anton Wilson's biography. I hope it is, man, because your first book, Chapel Perilous, Life and Thought Crimes of Robert Anton Wilson, which everyone should go and get a copy of. It's fascinating. And I absolutely love how you are able to present the information and not necessarily defend or condemn on any side of that. It's probably incredibly hard to do. I imagine you did some indexing yourself as you were working on this. So that book stands alone as a great reference for Robert Anton Wilson. You've also got your Gabriel patrickkennedy.substack.com. That's kind of just like your ever-flowing thoughts outside the book. What else you got working on? Are you working on a part 2 of Chapel Perious or what?
Currently editing firstly, thank you, man. Thanks for saying all that stuff. I'm editing the audio book right now. So I just recorded it. It's going to take a little bit of time, all DIY. So look out for that.
Are you reading it?
Yes.
Nice.
Yes. Yeah, man. So that's on the way. I was thinking, I think, kind of like maybe putting out some essays, behind the scenes stuff, some things that didn't quite make it into the book. Me and you spoken about some other possibilities, that hopefully there'll be developments along the way. But and I have, it's mostly that right now, man. Like, Chapel Perious audiobook coming. Check out the Substack, the website, chapelperious.us. And just stay tuned because I have some more work on the way.
And stay tuned for sure because we'll have Prop Anon back on here a bunch of other times. We're going to get to the bottom of whether or not who was in the CIA. We're going to figure it out. Between me and you, we're going to figure it out at some point. I promise you.
Right on. Yeah, you got me thinking.
Ready for a cosmic conspiracy about Stanley Kubrick, moon landings, and the CIA? Go visit nasacomic.com.
nasacomic.com, CIA's biggest con. Stanley Kubrick put us on, that's why we're singing this song. I'm nasacomic.com. Go visit nasacomic.com. Go visit nasacomic.com. CIA's biggest con. Stanley Kubrick put us on, that's why we're singing this song. I'm nasacomic.com. Go visit nasacomic.com. Go visit nasacomic.com. Yeah, go visit nasacomic.com.
Never a Straight Answer is a 40-page comic about Stanley Kubrick directing the Apollo space missions.
Yeah, go visit nasacomic.com.
This is the perfect read for comic, Kubrick, or conspiracy fans of all ages. For more details, visit nasacomic.com.
Paranoid. Yo. I scribble my life away, driven to write the page. Will it enlighten your brain? Give you the flight, my plane, paper the highs ablaze. Somewhat of an amazing feel when it's real to real. You will engage it. Your favorite, of course, the Lord of an arrangement. I gave you the proper results to hit the pavement. If they get emotional, hey, maybe your language, a game, how they playing it well without Lakers. Evade them, whatever the cost, they are the shapeshift. Snakes get decapitated, met is the apex. Execution of flame you out, nuclear bomb distributed at war, rather gruesome for eyes to see. Max them out, then I light my trees. Blow it off in the face, you're despising me for what though? Calculated and rather cutthroat. Paranoid American must be all the blunt smoke for real. Lord, give me a day away, vacate. They wait around to hate whatever they say. Man, it's not in the least bit. We get heavy rotate when a beat hits, so thank us, you're welcome. Fuck the niggas for real, you're welcome. They ain't never had a deal, you're welcome. Man, they lacking appeal, you're welcome. Yet they doing it still, you're welcome.